As soon as we get the word that that last computer is up and running, we will start what we're doing here today. In the meantime, you'll just kind of see us sitting here and not really saying anything. And Katie, when we're ready to go, just let me know that we're ready to go and we'll just start.
The last computer was just set up and I'm gonna head into the office.
Okay. Well, then at that point, in that case, we're going to start now. So at this time, I call the Independent Investigation Committee to order and I ask the clerk to call the roll.
Councilmember Evans,
Present.
Councilmember Patterson.
Here.
Thank you.
Okay. So for the community, we've got a little disclaimer to read. We're going to go through it verbatim, and other than breaks, you won't be hearing from myself or Councilmember Evans. So here we go. This is a public meeting of the Rochester City Council Prude Independent Investigation Committee, which consists of myself and Councilmember Malik Evans. This committee meeting is convened as part of the independent investigation being conducted by the law firm Emery, Celli, Brinckerhoff, Abady, Ward, and Maazel into the City of Rochester's communications, processes, and procedures that took place related to the death of Daniel Prude in police custody as authorized by ordinance number 2020-283. In light of the ongoing COVID-19 pandemic, this meeting is being conducted over video teleconference with real-time live stream access available to the public over the internet. Today's committee meeting is convened for the purpose of taking the deposition of former Chief Singletary as part of the independent investigation. This deposition is being taken in a public forum solely at the insistence of former Chief Singletary and his counsel. All other depositions taken as part of the independent investigation have been conducted in a non-public forum. Because this is a deposition, there will be no opening or closing statements by anyone participating. The purpose of the meeting is solely to ask questions and obtain sworn responses in furtherance of the independent investigation. This is not a court proceeding, and the rules of evidence do not apply. The special counsel investigator, Mr. Celli, and his team are expected to confine themselves and their questions to matters relevant to the investigation in the broadest sense possible and consistent with the implementing legislation, and for purpose of this deposition, we defer to the special counsel investigator's judgment on precisely what that entails. The committee will not act as a court. We will not entertain or resolve objections or conflicts that may arise during this deposition. We expect the witness to listen to the questions posed by the independent investigator and respond truthfully and accurately. Mr. Talon and Mr. Getz are here as counsel to the witness, and they are free to consult with Mr. Singletary as such, provided they do so when no question is pending. Mr. Cohen is here as counsel to the city of, Ms. Cohen is here as counsel to the city of Rochester. With one exception, all objections to any question by counsel are deemed preserved without need of an oral interruption. Accordingly, we do not expect to hear and will not permit counsel for the witness to state objections aloud on the record or to provide commentary during the testimony. The exception is for objections based on the attorney-client privilege, which may be stated aloud, along with a direction by counsel not to answer on the basis of privilege. We will not resolve or rule on those objections. They will simply be preserved for the record. Most importantly, today's deposition is part of an independent investigation. That is the command of the counsel as set forth in local law, and that is how we will conduct today's meeting. In order to preserve the independence of the investigation as required by ordinance number 2020-28, council members Evans and I will participate only by listening to and observing the deposition, not asking questions, suggesting questions to counsel, or offering comments or opinions. Neither I nor Councilmember Evans have been briefed on the facts or the substance of the independent investigation as developed to date, including the precise topics to be addressed in today's deposition. We do not know what questions will be asked of the witness, and we have not been provided in advance any of the exhibits that will be used. All of this will be revealed to us in real time as it is to the public. Neither Councilmember Evans nor I have participated in any of the other depositions that have been conducted as part of this independent investigation. We will periodically adjourn this meeting for short breaks and for a longer break for lunch. I will now direct independent investigator Mr. Celli to commence the deposition.
Thank you, Councilmember Patterson and Councilmember Evans, and good morning, Chief Singletary.
Morning, Mr. Celli.
We haven't met formally, but I'm Atty Celli, and I think you know that I and my law firm are special investigative counsel to the City Council of Rochester for the Prude matter. Today, we're going to be taking your deposition, as you know, and I know you're here with counsel. That's Mr. Talon and Mr. Getz. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Greetings, counsel. Sir, I know you were a police officer for many, many years, and I'm sure you have experience testifying in court. Have you ever testified in a deposition
Celli,
before?
I haven't sworn the witness.
Fair enough. Let's do that. That's important.
Chief Singletary, could you raise your right hand, please, sir? You don't have to stand, but do you swear the testimony you're about to give in this matter will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Chief Singletary. I should say, as I have said to other witnesses and counsel in this proceeding, this is not an adversarial proceeding. This is a fact-finding proceeding. So I'm just simply going to be asking questions and asking you to respond as best you can. Have you ever given a testimony in the context of a deposition as distinct from an appearance in court?
I have not.
Okay, so just so you have the basic ground rules, today I'm going to be asking you a series of questions. I would ask you to listen carefully to my questions and provide as full, truthful, and accurate as a response as you can. Is that okay?
Yes.
We are here with our stenographer. She's going to take everything down, so it's important that you provide verbal answers to my questions. Nods of the head or shakes of the head, shrugs, that kind of thing doesn't get picked up by our stenographer. So I'd ask that you respond verbally, okay?
Yes.
Okay. Sir, if at any time I ask you a question that you don't understand, I would just ask you to tell me I don't understand the question, and I'll do my best to rephrase or ask a different question. Is that okay?
Yes.
All right. And if at any time you would like to take a break, consult with your counsel, that's perfectly fine. Just say the word. I would simply ask that you not consult with counsel after I've asked a question and before you've tried to give your best answer if you understand the question. All right? Okay. Sir, have you done anything? One last question. Is there any reason that you're aware of that you believe you can't give truthful and accurate testimony today?
No.
Okay. Have you done anything, Chief Singletary, to prepare for today's testimony?
Yes.
And what have you done? And I'm asking not for any details of conversations you may have had with counsel, but if you spoke with counsel, just tell me that. And if you've spoken with anybody else or reviewed any materials, just tell me that, okay?
Yes. I've spoken with counsel. I've reviewed exhibits as well as, documents that was provided.
Okay. And when you say you reviewed exhibits, you're referring to pre-marked exhibits that my office sent over to your attorneys. Is that right?
That is correct.
Other than those exhibits, what other documents did you review?
That's pretty much it that I reviewed for this documents with regard to the notice of claim as well.
Okay. Did you speak to anyone other than counsel about the fact that you're going to give testimony today or the substance of your testimony today?
No.
All right. Now, Chief Singletary, you are aware that on March 23rd, 2020, officers of the Rochester Police Department had an encounter with a person named Daniel Prude. Is that right?
That is correct.
And when did you first become aware of the fact that officers of the RPD had had that encounter?
Early that morning on the 23rd.
And do you remember the time of day?
Around 7:25, I believe.
Okay. And how were you informed of that information?
Deputy Chief Joe Morbito.
And did he call you on the phone, or was it some other form of communication?
Called me on the phone.
And what was the substance of that conversation, as you recall it?
Deputy Chief Morbito advised me that there was an incident that occurred on Jefferson Avenue where an individual was arrested, and that individual went unconscious after he was arrested. He told me the story about how the individual came to Rochester and how he was staying with relatives, and that there was a prior MHA, and the individual was going to be under arrest for mental hygiene arrest. That's what I mean by MHA.
Thank you.
And also that the individual went unconscious during the arrest.
Mm-hmm. And was there anything else that you recall from that conversation with Chief Morbito?
Chief Morbito advised me that the condition of Mr. Prude was not good. He was still alive. He was at the hospital. He was in stable condition.
Okay. And based on that information, did you determine that you should contact the mayor of the city of Rochester, Lovely Warren, to inform her about what you had just learned?
Yes.
Was there any other information that was available to you when you made the decision to call Mayor Warren, other than what Chief Morbito had told you?
No. Chief Morbito just explained to me that our officers had contact with Mr. Prude during the time that he went unconscious.
And when you say that Chief Morbito told you that your officers had had contact, am I to understand that Chief Morbito explained to you that RPD officers had had physical contact with Mr. Prude at the time he went unconscious? Did Chief Morbito say anything about Mr. Prude having ingested illegal drugs?
He told me that the individual was on PCP.
And based on that information, all of that information that you've just testified about, did you make a decision to contact the mayor? And why did you decide to contact the mayor based on that information?
Based on the fact that Mr. Prude's condition was not good at that particular point in time, the prognosis was not good, and also the fact that our officers had contact with Mr. Prude. They were restraining him on the ground at that particular point in time. So we were going to treat this as an in-custody death incident from the very start.
Of course, as of 7:30 in the morning, Mr. Prude hadn't died yet. That didn't happen for about a week, right?
Correct.
Were you informed in that initial call that ambulance personnel believed that he had actually passed on the scene and then he'd been revived?
I was not informed that he had passed on the scene.
Okay. Now, I understand from sworn testimony that you've given in the context of your notice of claim against the city that you had two calls with Mayor Warren on March 23rd about the Prude matter. Is that right?
That is correct. 1 in the morning. And there was also a conference call that we had at 1:30 p.m., which was a scheduled one-on-one conference where we called into a 428 number and provided an access code. Obviously, because of COVID, we were not meeting face to face.
Okay, so the second call was a previously scheduled sort of check-in, you would say, between you and the mayor?
That is correct.
And I'm going to ask him general questions about each of those calls, and then I'm going to go into a lot more detail about each of those calls, okay? As to the first call, what was your purpose in contacting the mayor at that point?
Just to give her an update as to what we were dealing with on Jefferson Avenue and Mr. Prude, and that I had preliminary information, very preliminary information, and that I had not watched the body-worn camera video as of that moment. And that I would, once I watched the body-worn camera video and talk further with my command staff, that I would call her at sometime after I watched the video, which was the 1:30 p.m. one-on-one.
Got it. And so this first call was at, did you say 8:30 in the morning?
It was sometime around there.
Okay. And as of the point that you had that call, did you have any written materials from your command staff or anybody in the department about the circumstances of Mr. Prude's mental health arrest?
I did not.
Okay. And I take it was just the two of you on that initial call?
Yes.
How long did that call last?
A couple of minutes.
And what do you recall the mayor saying on that call?
She said, okay, let me know once you watch the body-worn camera video. And there was a couple questions that were asked with regard to the incident.
Okay, well, what were the questions?
It was, from Chicago, and also the nature of Mr. Prude's conduct.
Okay, that she was asking you to describe his conduct, is that right?
Yes, and the officer's conduct as well. But I had not watched the body-worn camera video, so it was a preliminary assessment.
Okay, what did you tell her in that first call about the officer's conduct?
Right, there's some background going on.
I don't have a dog, so it's not mine.
Sorry, can you repeat the question?
Yes, what did you tell Mayor Warren in the initial call about the officer's conduct at the scene?
That the officers had, with the initial call, that the officers had restrained Mr. Prude. I didn't have all the details with regard to the nature, but I knew that the officers had restrained Mr. Prude, so I advised the mayor that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude at that particular point in time.
Okay, and what did you tell Mayor Warren in that first call, as best you can recall? And we'll go into some more detail about the conduct of Mr. Prude.
So what did I tell her about the conduct of Mr. Prude?
Yes, I think you said she asked about that, right?
Yes. That initially, that Mr. Prude was compliant when the officers had taken him into custody, as well as at some point the officers went hands-on with Mr. Prude, and at some point he went unconscious.
In the initial call with the mayor that morning, did you mention the fact that Chief Morbito had told you that Mr. Prude had ingested PCP?
Yes, I believe that I told her that he was on PCP.
Okay. Now switching over to the second call for a minute, you say that took place around 1:30, and that was a regularly scheduled conference call between you and her, right?
That is correct.
By the way, in both of these calls, it was just the two of you on each call, right?
To my knowledge, the second call was just the two of us.
Okay. And when you made the second call, you had watched the body-worn camera footage of the incident, is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. And
I'm sorry, did you say that's correct? I didn't hear you.
Yes, that is correct.
and in the second call, did you rely on any written materials or written reports from your command staff or anybody else at the PD?
I did. I relied on, in my notice of claim, I have two documents that I had in front of me when I had briefed Mayor Warren on our conference call. The
Great.
first
I'm aware of those and we'll come to those, but I appreciate that. And how long did the second call with the mayor last?
We were scheduled from 1:30 to 2:15, and we were on the phone for a good portion of 45 minutes, I would say. And we talked, the majority of the call was spent talking about Mr. Prude.
Okay. So you think it was probably more than 20 minutes of the 45 minutes that you devoted to the Prude matter? Okay. I want to go back to the first call and ask a couple of really specific questions, okay, Chief? When you spoke to the mayor in the first phone call, did you let her know that Mr. Prude was found outdoors, naked, on a cold winter night?
Yes.
And did you tell her on the first call that Mr. Prude had been making statements when he was approached by police?
Yes, I advised her that he was making irrational statements when the officers made contact with Mr. Prude.
Did you provide in that first call any details about the comments that Mr. Prude was making?
I don't believe I did, no.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor in that first call that Mr. Prude appeared to be, when encountered by police, somebody who was in a mental distress?
Yes.
And in that first initial call around 8:30 in the morning on the 23rd, did you explain to Mayor Warren that there were more than one police officer who had physical contact with Mr. Prude?
Yes, I believe I described it as officers.
I see. Did you provide the names of the officers who were involved? Okay. And in that initial call, did you tell the mayor that the officers of the RPD were having physical contact with Mr. Prude after he had been put in handcuffs?
I explained to her that there, at some point in time, that there was contact with Mr. Prude. I can't remember if I told her that it was after he had been placed in handcuffs.
Were you aware when you called the mayor that morning that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude after he was already in handcuffs?
I don't remember.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor in that initial call that a spit sock had been placed over Mr. Prude's head at a time when he was already handcuffed?
Yes, I do remember Deputy Chief Morbito saying that they had placed a spit sock on Mr. Prude.
And you communicated that to the mayor?
Yes.
And just to be clear, you told her in that initial call that a spit sock had been put over Mr. Prude's head after he was already in handcuffs?
I don't remember if I mentioned that he was already handcuffed.
Okay. Did you in the initial call use the term stabilization or stabilization techniques to describe what the officers, the nature of the physical contact was between the officers and Mr. Prude?
First call, I don't believe I did. The second call, I did.
Okay. What does that term mean to you, Chief?
Stabilization.
Yes.
Holding someone on the ground, preventing their movement.
Okay. And in that initial call, did you use the term segment or segmenting technique when you described to the mayor the physical contact that officers had with Mr. Prude?
I did not use that term. The mayor and I often talked in regular terms, if you will, but I did not use the term segmenting in the first call, nor did I use it in the second call. The mayor and I talked in plain language because I knew she would not know what the term segmenting meant.
Well, what does the term segmenting mean to you?
Term segmenting was a new technique that was taught to the department, instructed to the department in January of that year. We had trainers who were being trained in it for a couple of months, and it was rolled out in an in-service earlier that in 2020. Segmenting to me was when the officers places someone's hands on the head and stabilizes the head.
So the officer places his or her hands on another person's head and applies pressure. Is that fair? Okay. In that initial call, did you say anything to the mayor about one of the officers applying a hypoglossal pressure point to Mr. Prude?
During the initial call,
Yes.
no, I just basically said that the officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude. I didn't go into detail until the second call.
Okay. And the second, we'll circle back to that, but just since we're talking about it, on the second call, did you mention the hypoglossal pressure point?
I mentioned that Officer Vaughn had the head of Mr. Prude and it was pinned to the pavement.
Okay, so we'll come back and get some more detail on that. In the initial call, did you tell the mayor that you believe that the conduct of the officers, as far as you understood it at that point, was appropriate, professional, and by the book?
I don't think I made a determination at that point. I had not seen the video. I just told the mayor briefly what I was relayed from Deputy Chief Joe Morbito.
And in that first call, did the mayor ask for an opportunity herself to view the body-worn camera video? Okay. So in the initial call that you had with the mayor, did you mention that there would be a criminal investigation of Rochester police officers arising from this incident?
Not during the initial call, no.
That's something that came up in the second call?
Correct.
We'll come back to that. And in the initial call, did you say anything about the fact that there would be a professional standards section internal investigation of the officer's conduct arising from this incident?
During the initial call, I did not.
That also came up in the second call? Okay.
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your answer.
That is correct.
Is there anything about that first call that we haven't touched on that you think should be described in this testimony?
No, it was, like I said, a very preliminary call based on information that I had received from Deputy Chief Joe Morbito, and I explained to her that I would watch the body-worn camera and provide additional information once I had done so.
Okay. So the second call that day was the previously scheduled 1:30 one-on-one between you and the mayor. Tell us as best you can what you told the mayor on that call.
I had the two documents in front of me that you are familiar with. That one was a summary. It was an email from the Deputy Chief Joe Morbito that I had asked him to provide me with additional information so that I can brief the mayor. One was a document, and that's part of the notice of claim. And it's an email from the major crimes captain. And it's also an email from the lieutenant who was on scene that night and in charge of Genesee Section, 1st Platoon, where this incident occurred. So I had these two documents in front of me. And on the documents, I have highlighted specific information. We went through the whole entire document, and I provided the mayor with this information that's on the document.
Let me stop you there, Chief, if I can, and because I actually want to put up, Catherine, if you could post for us exhibit number 6, and we'll screen share that so that council and others watching can see what we're talking about.
Mr. Celli, is this being marked at this time?
Yes, we're going to mark as exhibit 6 what's been previously marked with the Bates range Singletary 74 and 75. And it's a series of emails, and I'll direct the witness's attention to various aspects of it, okay? If you would, Catherine, go to the next page, first page of the exhibit. So, Chief Singletary, I have placed before you a series of emails. I think we should ignore the top email from Lieutenant Sweatman you're not on that email, and really focus on Deputy Chief Morbito's email to you on Monday, March 23rd at 11:51, FYI, and then the email that follows below that. Do you see that?
Let's see the email that follows below.
In other words, Captain Umbrino's email to Chief Morbito at
Okay.
7:27.
Yes, I do see that. On my document and my notice claim, I have it highlighted just to
Okay.
for reference.
If you prefer to look at it in those terms, why don't we go, Catherine, to Exhibit 50? So it's the second to last page of the exhibit. We're going to mark as Exhibit 50 a document bearing the Bates numbers. Actually, we didn't Bates stamp this. This is Mr. Singletary's notice of claim with attachments, which I want to say is dated December 3rd. And we're going to the second to last page, Catherine. Maybe it's right. Exhibit D. I'm sorry. Exhibit D of this notice of claim. There you go. Nope, you just had it. Right. Next one. Next page. Okay. So Chief Singletary, I'm showing you what has been marked as Exhibit D to your notice of claim, which is the Monday, March 23rd, 2020 email from Deputy Chief Morbito to you and others regarding Jefferson Avenue incident. Do you see that?
Yes, I do.
And the first question I have for you is, you mentioned the highlighting on this document. Is that highlighting that you included with a highlight pen, or how did that get there?
Yes. That's highlight that I included with a highlight pen in preparation to brief the mayor. I wanted to be sure that I notated certain points within the document that I really wanted to express to the mayor.
Okay. And is it your testimony that, are you telling us that the things that you highlighted are things that you told the mayor in that call at 1:30 on the 23rd?
Yes, I went over the entire document with the mayor, as well as specifically to note to myself to ensure the things that I would advise the mayor on.
Okay. So I want to focus on a couple of specific things. I'm going to set aside the issue of highlighting or not highlighting and just ask some specific questions from this document, okay? About halfway down in Captain Umbrino's message, he writes, "Sure enough, they found the victim completely naked in the street." Do you see that?
Yes.
And the victim being referred to there is Mr. Prude, right?
Correct.
That's the term that Captain Umbrino uses?
Correct.
Okay. And in the second call, did you describe to the mayor that Mr. Prude had been found completely naked in the street that morning?
Yes.
Okay. And the next line, he says, he was ordered to the ground and complied without resistance or force and was handcuffed. Do you see that?
I do.
Did you communicate that to the mayor in your call at 1:30 on the 23rd?
Yes, I advised the mayor that Mr. Prude was initially taken into custody with no force, and that he was eventually placed on the ground. He was always already on the ground. He was on the ground and he was handcuffed.
Okay. And the next line that Captain Umbrino writes is, after a brief period of time, he began to try and get up. You see that?
Yes.
Did you explain to the mayor when you spoke to her on the 23rd that Mr. Prude was handcuffed and on the ground, and after a brief time, he began to try to get up?
I did explain that to the mayor, as I had already watched the video of such, and I did explain that to the mayor. And I explained that is when the officers went hands-on.
Incidentally, do you remember what time of day you watched the body-worn camera footage from this incident?
We had a 9 a.m. command staff meeting that morning, and it was sometime after that. I think the meeting may have lasted approximately an hour. Typically, they last an hour. So it was right around somewhere between 10 o'clock-ish at some point.
And you watched that with members of your command staff, right?
Correct. I believe Lieutenant Shaw and I watched the video, yes. And other members of the command staff did watch it as well.
Who was present when you watched the body worn camera footage?
Lieutenant Shaw,
Oh, just the two of you.
correct. We were by his cubicle, we watched it.
I see. I thought you said a second ago that other members of the command staff were present as well.
Other members of the command staff were directed to watch the video.
I see, but they didn't watch it with you. They watched it at another time. Sorry, I missed that, Chief.
Yes.
Who were the other members of the command staff who you asked to watch the body worn camera footage?
It was the three deputy chiefs, Deputy Chief Commander Morbito, Deputy Chief Mira, Deputy Chief Mira, Morbito, and Simmons, Commanders Rivera, Correa, as well as Commander Faber.
And why did you ask your command staff to view the body worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
This was a very serious incident that had occurred that morning. So we wanted to make sure, as we typically do, we watched the review of the video of the body worn camera to see, what occurred, if there was any, violations of policy or procedure and things of that nature.
Okay. And prior to your second call with the mayor that day, did you consult with any members of your command staff about what they and you concluded by viewing the body worn camera footage?
We had watched the video.
I'm sorry, could you start again?
We had watched the body worn camera video. And yeah, there was discussions that were had, throughout that day, throughout that week about the video.
Well, let's just confine it to discussions that you had with command staff that day before you communicated with the mayor. What do you recall about that?
We talked about that we were going to have an internal investigation, a criminal review, as we knew that Mr. Prude's prognosis was not good at that particular point in time, but we knew he was stable. We watched the video, myself and Lieutenant Shaw, and we, basically talked about it, saw some of the actions of the officers. And again, I didn't make a determination at that particular point in time whether the officers were, justified or not in their actions.
Did any member of your command staff express to you that they had a view one way or the other, whether the conduct of the officers was appropriate and professional, having viewed the body worn camera footage?
Repeat the question.
Yeah, prior to you speaking to the mayor that afternoon, had any other, you said that you yourself had not reached a conclusion about whether the officers had behaved appropriately. Is that fair?
Correct, because we were doing investigations. We were going to be ordering investigations.
By the way, when you viewed the body worn camera footage yourself, did you view it from the perspective of one officer's footage or multiple officers' footage?
So there was a couple videos that were, I think, downloaded already in there. I think it was officers Santiago and Vaughn's.
Okay. And having viewed those, the body worn camera footage from those two officers, your testimony is you had not reached a conclusion in your own mind as to whether, in general, the officers had behaved appropriately in their restraint of Mr. Prude. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. And my question is, to go back half a step, did any other members of the command staff communicate to you whether they had reached a conclusion, having viewed body worn camera footage from the incident, about whether they believed that the officers had behaved appropriately or not?
No, by looking at the preliminary assessment of the video, what we were doing was seeing, was there anything of a criminal nature that we can judge from the video at that particular point in time, whether anybody needed to be placed on administrative leave, suspended. Those are some of the conversations that we had.
Okay. Did you conclude after you saw the video that you saw that day and before you spoke to the mayor the second time, did you conclude that nothing of a criminal nature had occurred in the incident?
Upon preliminary review, yes.
And by that, I mean that no officer had engaged in criminal conduct based on your preliminary review at that point.
Based on the preliminary review at that point, The investigations were just ordered by myself.
And when you spoke to the mayor on that second call, did you communicate to her that your preliminary view was that the officers had not done anything criminal in their interaction with Mr. Prude?
I explained to her that there was, the officer stabilized Mr. Prude. I explained that the 3 officers' positions. I explained to her that Officer Vaughn held Mr. Prude's head down. Officer Talladay was on Mr. Prude's side and back area, as well as Officer Santiago held and stabilized Mr. Prude's feet during that time.
I appreciate that answer, and it saves me about 4 questions, but my question was a little bit different, which is, did you tell the mayor in that second call that you had concluded preliminarily that the officers had not done anything criminal in terms of their interaction with Mr. Prude?
Yes, I said it appeared that there was nothing egregious at that particular point in time. Again, that was a preliminary assessment. I explained to the mayor that we were going to be conducting investigations into such, but yes, I did not. I told the mayor that there was no strikes, there was no punches with regard to the video.
Okay. Tell me as best you can, if you can, recall the words that you used when you described to the mayor your conclusion that, as I think you just said, nothing egregious had happened and that there were no strikes.
I said just that. I said the officers held him down. There appeared to be no punches, no strikes. And I believe we talked a little bit about the Christopher Pate case during the second phone call. And I said, it's not nothing like that. The officers just held Mr. Prude down to the point where he tried to get up at that point in time.
Okay. And the Christopher Pate case was a situation where a member of the force had engaged in excessive force against a civilian. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Okay. So let's go back to the email that you received from Chief Morbito at 11:51 on March 23rd. In Captain Umbrio's reporting in the 7:27 a.m. document email that he sent, just reading along, he says, quote, Vaughn applied the segment technique to the victim's head. Talladay had his knee on the victim's lower back, and Santiago held his feet. Do you see that sentence?
I do.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor that an officer, and whether you described him by his name or not, had applied a segment technique to the victim's head?
I did not. I said, when I explained to the mayor, again, me and the mayor talked in plain language because I knew she would not know what segmenting was. I said that Officer Vaughn stabilized Mr. Prude's head. He held his head down to the pavement.
Is segmenting a stabilization technique?
Is segmenting a stabilization technique?
Yeah.
Holding someone's head down to the ground. It's a different word, but I describe it to her as stabilization.
Okay. And did you describe to the mayor specifically that an officer held Mr. Prude's head to the ground after he was handcuffed and while he was wearing a spit sock?
Yes.
And did you tell her that the officer was holding Mr. Prude's head to the ground while he was wearing a spit sock, while he was in handcuffs, on a cold night for more than 2 minutes?
I don't know if we talked about the cold night, but I mean, I think we both knew what the night was like. It was the temperature.
Fair enough. I guess my focus really was about the amount of time. Did you communicate to the mayor the amount of time that an officer held Mr. Prude's head to the pavement?
I don't believe so.
Okay. And what, if anything, did you say? Strike that. Did you tell the mayor that an officer, perhaps identifying him as Officer Talladay, had placed his knee on Mr. Prude's lower back during the restraint?
Yes, I did.
What did you say about that?
I said that there was another officer, Officer Talladay, that had placed his knee along the back side of Mr. Prude while he was on the ground.
And did you characterize or explain to the mayor over what period of time the officer had his knee in Mr. Prude's back?
I did not, and nor did the mayor ask.
Fair enough. By the way, well, let's just go to Santiago and Captain Umbrino states that refers to Officer Santiago holding Mr. Prude's feet. Is that something that you told the mayor?
I did. I said that Officer Santiago was on the ground holding Mr. Prude's feet so that he couldn't move.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor the names of the 3 officers who had hands-on to Mr. Prude?
Yes,
So you mentioned Vaughn, Halliday, and Santiago. Is that correct?
I did.
Okay. Did those names have any reaction from the mayor, to your recollection? Did the mayor ask any questions about the conduct as you described it of Officer Vaughn?
No, not that I recall. I mean, we had a back and forth. I remember one of the themes of the conversation was about PCP and how it was kind of unfamiliar to Rochester. And the mayor saying that he must have brought that with him from, Chicago or, where we came from, because it was a drug that was not familiar to Rochester. The mayor was kind of surprised that he was on PCP.
Okay. Did you tell the mayor that prior to going unconscious, Mr. Prude began to vomit?
Yes.
And did she ask any questions about that?
Yeah, I think she said, like she just asked clarifying questions with regard to, what do you mean he vomited? I said there was a clear liquid that came out of his mouth during that particular point in time when the officers were stabilizing him.
Got it. Did you tell the mayor that officers and medical personnel checked for a pulse on Mr. Prude after he became unconscious and could not find a pulse?
I know I said he was tended to by medical personnel and that he was unconscious, and then they had regained a pulse and took him to the hospital.
Okay.
I'm sorry, and they had regained a pulse?
And took him to the hospital.
In Captain Umbrino's description, he has this line, AMR began CPR and called it a 500. You see that?
Yes.
What does that mean?
Medical 500 means they're working a potential fatal victim.
Okay.
I'm sorry, could you repeat that again?
A potential fatal victim. And
then Captain Umbrino says victim was ultimately revived. Did that communicate to you that Mr. Prude had passed away on the scene and was brought back and revived by medical personnel?
Well, I know he had lost conscious, and then he had been brought back and was transported to the hospital.
Okay. And did you communicate, did you tell the mayor that Mr. Prude had been declared a medical 500, potentially a fatal, this was a potentially fatal incident, and that he was revived on the scene?
I wouldn't use the term medical 500 with the mayor. Again, as I stated that her and I talked in plain language. I said that he went unconscious and he was brought back and then taken to the hospital.
Okay. Let's Catherine, if you could help us, let's have a look at next page of the notice of claim. So it'll be Singletary, I guess that would be 306. Got a little obscured on this document. Chief Singletary, this is a document that you attached to your notice of claim. Is this also something that you used in your communications with the mayor on the 23rd?
I did. I had both of these documents in front of me.
And I noticed on the notice of claim, so let's focus on, I'm not sure of his rank, but Tordai, is that a lieutenant? Yes?
Yes.
Good guess by me. So Lieutenant Tordai sends a message to Deputy Chief Morbito and others, and that ultimately gets forwarded to you around noontime by Deputy Chief Morbito, right?
That is correct. After my request to have these incidents forwarded to me with additional information so that I can brief the mayor.
Okay. And here we also have yellow highlighting on this document. Is that highlighting that you applied, sir?
Yes, it is.
And what was the purpose of that highlighting?
To ensure that I hit certain points within the memo to advise the mayor.
Okay. And is it your testimony that you conveyed everything that is highlighted to the mayor?
Yes, in this document, I had both documents in front of me, and I wanted to ensure that there were certain things that really hit with the mayor, but the mayor, pretty much I went over the entire document with the mayor. I really wanted to make sure that I hit certain points, underlined, highlighted, as I was going through the document with the mayor.
So let me ask about a couple of things that are highlighted on Lieutenant Tordai's email from the 23rd. Did you tell Mayor Warren that a tow truck driver employed by Gates Towing saw Mr. Prude running southbound on Jefferson Avenue?
Told her that he had encountered a tow truck driver on Jefferson Avenue.
Okay, so where the document refers to the driver having been employed by Gates Towing, that's not something that detail is not something that you communicated to the mayor. Is that fair?
That's fair.
Okay. And you also highlighted that Mr. Prude had, quote, just arrived from Chicago, took some PCP. Do you see that?
Yes.
And what did you say about the PCP?
I stated that this individual, based on officers' observations and reports that they had received from family members, that this individual was likely high on PCP.
Did you tell Mayor Warren that what you were led to believe by this memo is that the PCP had been taken and that Mr. Prude had been taken to the hospital after that and then released from the hospital subsequent to that and prior to his arrest?
Can you repeat the question?
Sure. I'm just focusing on Lieutenant Tordai's memo. So he writes, just arrived from Chicago, took some PCP, and then he goes on, as a result, he became suicidal, made statements that he wanted to die, and wished someone would just kill him. He was MHA'd on 3/22, March 22nd, about 1900 hours. He was released a few hours later and returned to 50 Child Street. And what I take from that is that Lieutenant Tordai is saying that Mr. Prude had taken PCP at some earlier point on the 22nd, gone to the hospital, and been released. Is that fair?
That is correct. That is the first encounter that RP officers may have had with Mr. Prude.
Okay. And my question is, did you tell the mayor that the PCP that was described had been taken on the 22nd, not on the 23rd, that the gentleman had been taken to the hospital and then released from the hospital?
I think we talked about just about an overall PCP was had based on the actions of the officers that night on the 23rd. As the 22nd, it was relevant to our conversation, but the actual incident involving Mr. Prude with the officers being hands-on, there is that report as well. And based on his actions from leaving Child Street, walking up West Main, Jefferson Avenue, and ultimately the officers having contact with him.
My question, though, Chief, is did you explain to the mayor in this call that Mr. Prude had had an encounter with RPD on the 22nd, had been taken into custody, sent to the hospital, and released?
Yes, I did.
Okay. I notice in, strike that, going down to the second full paragraph of Lieutenant Tordai's email to Deputy Chief Morbito, about 2/3 of the way down that paragraph, he writes, S, referring to Mr. Prude, became restive by means of moving around uncontrollably and stating that he wanted to die and asked the officers to shoot him. Do you see that?
Yes. Became resistive.
Resistive. There you go. Thank you. Did you say anything about that subject to the mayor on the 23rd in that second call?
I did. I described Mr. Prude's actions while he was rolling around on the ground during that second call. Yes.
What did you say as best you can recall?
I told her that he was uttering things, he was acting irrational. While on the ground, he was saying, look at my penis, look at my penis. It made references to his penis, as well as he was asking for the officer's gun. And ultimately, he tried to get up, and the officers went hands-on with Mr. Prude. And I explained the positions as I did earlier.
Okay. Lieutenant Tordai in the next sentence says, quote, officers performed ground stabilization techniques and segmenting. Do you see that?
Correct.
And would it be fair to say that in that sentence, Lieutenant Tordai is drawing a distinction between stabilization techniques and segmenting as a different matter?
He uses the word "and," correct.
Okay. We can put that aside. We're still talking about the second call that you had with the mayor that day. At any time in that call did she say, you know, Chief, I'd like to have a look at the body worn camera footage?
No, she did not.
Did you suggest to her, you know, Mayor, this is a serious incident that I'm describing to you. You might want to have a look at the body worn camera footage?
I did not. I gave the mayor the details based on these two documents as I had them. I told her that we were ordering investigations, but I did not make a reference to her that she needed to look at the body worn camera video.
Why not?
I'm sorry?
I said, why not? I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but why didn't you?
I just didn't make a reference to it with regard to such. The mayor has in the past, when she wanted to look at a video, she has made it clear that she wants to look at a body worn camera video.
Okay. When you called her on the 23rd, the second time, and with all this information in front of you, did you expect that she would, once you described all this information to her, that she would want to see the body worn camera footage?
Did I expect her?
Yeah.
She did not. She didn't. That's
No,
all.
I understand. I guess I'm just trying to get at your thinking. And did you think that I'm going to tell her this information and she's probably going to want to see the footage?
The mayor is pretty direct. If she wanted to see the footage, she would have definitely told me. There's been other times where she has requested to see body worn camera footage, and every single time we have watched body worn camera footage.
Sure. And you would agree that you were somebody that had enough experience working with the mayor to have a sense of when she might want to see body worn camera footage and when she wouldn't, right?
That is correct. And I explained to her the circumstances of this incident, and I kind of let her know that upon my preliminary review, that there wasn't really anything egregious at that particular point in time. So I took it that she was okay with my explanation of the events.
Fair enough. By the way, in this second call, did you tell the mayor that from your perspective, the officers had behaved by the book?
I never said that.
Did you tell her that your conclusion, based on being an officer of long standing and the chief, was that the officers had basically behaved appropriately under the circumstances?
There wasn't anything that I saw in a preliminary review of the incident that was rather conclusive that I can say that the officers acted in a manner that was justified or not justified. Again, we had ordered investigations at that particular point in time, but when I saw the video at that particular point in time, I explained to the mayor that there was no punches, there was no strikes, there were just stabilization techniques that the officers had performed on Mr. Prude.
Did you say anything on the 23rd to the mayor about the fact that officers were joking and laughing and making derogatory comments in the context of their police work in this situation?
No, at that particular point in time, the focus was on the force that was used in Mr. Prude's prognosis.
When you reviewed the body-worn camera footage that day, did it strike you that these officers had, or at least one or more of them had made comments that were jokey or derogatory with respect to Mr. Prude?
Yes, there was going to be a point in time where that was to be addressed in the internal investigation.
But that's something you noticed when you saw the video, right?
That is correct.
And that's something you didn't tell the mayor about when you spoke to her on the 23rd. Is that fair?
Correct. The focus was on the force that was used on Mr. Prude, as well as Mr. Prude's condition, and his prognosis was not good.
Okay. You testified earlier, Chief, that one of the things you mentioned was that there would be a criminal review of the police officer's conduct, right?
That is correct.
What, as best you can recall, did you tell the mayor about that?
I told the mayor that based on the prognosis of Mr. Prude, that we were going to treat this as an in-custody death because his prognosis was not good. There was an indication that Mr. Prude may pass away. We started to have conversations about as to ordering an internal investigation that was conducted by the professional standards section, which was an investigation to determine violations of policy or procedure within the department. Then we also had a criminal review that was going to be conducted by the major crimes unit, as they had responded that night because they were already in on another homicide that occurred that morning. So the criminal review was ordered to gather facts as to whether there was any criminal conduct on the part of the police officers. I also told the mayor that I was going to reach out to Sandra Dorley, the district attorney, as a result. And I texted Sandra Dorley that day, and I had a phone conversation with Sandra Dorley the next day.
Okay.
About such.
That's helpful. A couple questions to clarify. You used the term, I noticed, criminal review. Is that the same thing as a criminal investigation?
Criminal review, some may think so, but the criminal review is going to be a fact finding by major crimes, and ultimately with it being turned over to the district attorney, the actual investigation.
Okay, fair enough. And did you tell the mayor on the 23rd that you mentioned the Monroe County DA, correct?
Correct.
Did you say anything about the Attorney General's office potentially becoming involved in this matter?
I don't believe so at that particular point in time. I mentioned the district attorney was going to review the case. Then I had reached out to the district attorney to ask her to review the case and let her know that I was going to be ordering a criminal review of the incident.
Were you aware when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd that the governor had issued something known as Executive Order 147 that would give authority to the Attorney General's office to investigate significant injuries to unarmed people that are inflicted by law enforcement?
Yes, at that particular point in time, Mr. Prude was still alive. So I didn't mention the fact that the Attorney General's office would be involved early on in that conversation that I had with the mayor.
But you knew that, it just, you didn't mention it because you were focused on the DA, is that fair?
Correct. The incident was just that day. The incident was hours old.
Okay. And did you specifically tell the mayor that there would be an internal investigation by the professional standards section?
I did.
And did she ask any questions about either the criminal review or the internal investigation that you were referring to?
No, not that I remember. I just remember explaining to her, the process of such, and given the fact that his prognosis was not good, that I was ordering those two investigations that day. I told her that Lieutenant Sweatman from the professional standards section would be doing a preliminary review. And the preliminary review is within 2 days of a use of force incident or any incident that I obligate to PSS, Professional Standards Section, that they would do a review, which means watching all the body worn camera video within 48 hours of the incident and providing me an interdepartmental correspondence based on their preliminary findings. That report from PSS, Professional Standards Section, is not a report in its finality. It is just a preliminary review of the incident.
Catherine, thank you, Chief. Catherine, can you pull up for us Exhibit 3? Just go to the first printed page. So Chief Singletary, is this the preliminary review report that you were just referring to from Lieutenant Sweatman of the Professional Standards Section?
Yes,
I noticed that it's dated the 23rd of March. Is that the date you received it?
yes, I believe it was that evening.
And I want to focus you on a couple of aspects of this. By the way, just for the record, we're marking this as Exhibit 3. It's pre-marked, and it's a document bearing the Bates number Singletary 68 through 70. Catherine, if you could go to the second page of that document. Actually, but bottom of the first, Chief, reading over to the second. Sorry about that. So the sentence begins at the bottom of page 1 of 3. The police reports, now if you turn the page, support that force in the form of stabilization and segmenting was utilized only after Mr. Prude attempted to get up from his seated position on the street. Do you see that?
I do.
Here again, we have, in this case, Lieutenant Sweatman drawing a distinction between stabilization and segmenting. Do you see that?
I do.
And that's because those are two different things. Fair enough?
He does use the word and segmenting. And my description to the mayor, like I said, the mayor and I talked in plain language. She would not know what the term segmenting mean. So I described to her as to what I saw in the video.
I appreciate that. I'm just asking a narrow question, which is, do you agree that stabilization is different from segmenting?
Yes.
Okay.
It's still a stabilization technique. The head is being held on the ground.
A little further down the page, Lieutenant Sweatman in a bullet point says, at that time, officers Vaughn, Tality, and Santiago utilized level 2 techniques, parentheses, non-impact force, to keep Mr. Prude from standing. Do you see that?
I do.
What are level 2 techniques?
It would be a pressure point, non-strike techniques, punches, kicks that didn't occur. So that would not be a level 2, that would be a level 3. So level 2 would be, it could be pepper spray, it could be stabilization.
Mm-hmm. And a hypoglossal pressure point would be level 2? I'm sorry?
Correct.
Okay. And here again, we have Lieutenant Sweatman referring to the segmenting technique as something that Officer Vaughn utilized, correct?
That is correct.
And he also says that a hypoglossal pressure point was also documented on the use of force report from Officer Vaughn, correct?
Correct.
And when he describes Officer Talladay's conduct, he says that Talladay appears to utilize ground stabilization in the beginning, but eventually transitions to a knee on top and maintains arm control. What did you understand Lieutenant Sweatman to be referring to when he talked about ground stabilization?
It would have been maybe a knee across the shoulder blade of Mr. Prude.
Okay. Did you have this report from Lieutenant Sweatman when you spoke to the mayor on March 23rd?
No,
I'm sorry?
no, I did not.
Okay.
This report was given to me in the afternoon.
Did it come to you by email or just by hand delivery or some other means?
I believe it was via email.
Okay. In your call with the mayor, or your calls with the mayor on the 23rd, was there any discussion had about whether or not this incident should be reported to members of the city council?
No,
That's something that occurred to you as something that might be considered at that point?
no.
Why not?
Mr. Prude was still alive at that point. It just wouldn't be a consideration to contact city council at this point with regard to a use of force. We primarily, certain uses of forces don't contact city council.
Well, you're certainly aware of situations where there's been uses of force by RPD that did not result in someone's death, where the council wanted to know about that. Would you agree with that?
Correct.
Christopher Pate case that you referred to in your conversation with the mayor that day was exactly such a case, right?
The Christopher Pate case, yes, that's an incident that, myself and Deputy Chief Simmons, at the time we were in acting capacity, that we were the ones that phoned the mayor in August. I remember in August of 19? Me and Deputy Chief Simmons were the ones who advised the mayor about Mr. Pate.
Got it. Catherine, you could take this down. We don't need an exhibit on this. We're just going to ask a few questions. I guess my question is, when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd and the issue of the Christopher Pate case arose, did she say anything about the fact that the Christopher Pate case had been one that had been reported to the city council and that they had wanted to see the body worn camera video in that context?
We never talked about the city council.
Okay. And when you spoke to the mayor on the 23rd, was there any discussion about notifying the public of the fact that there was a criminal investigation of members of the RPD that you were at that point ordering to occur?
There was no discussion.
Okay. Is that something that occurred to you and you decided not to bring it up, or just never occurred to you?
There are criminal reviews, internal investigations done every day, in some form that are ordered. Not every day, but there are criminal reviews that are done that don't involve city council.
Well, I want to make sure my question is clear. I'm not asking now about notification to the council. I'm asking about notification to the public. Is it your testimony that there are officers of the RPD who are subject to criminal investigation and that is not something that is told to the public when it's happening?
I would say criminal reviews. Yes, there have been times where there has been a criminal review in the department, whether it's conducted by, special investigation sections or major crimes, that it's not made public.
Mm-hmm. When there is an officer involved shooting, does that trigger a review by the major crimes unit, a review of the conduct of the officers?
That is correct.
Okay. And that's a criminal review, just like the criminal review that you ordered here, right?
That is correct.
And when there's been an officer involved shooting in your experience on the RPD, the fact that there is a criminal review undertaken of the officers is something that is discussed in public. Is that fair?
That is correct. I think, I think you're talking about an incident where a shooting, officer involved shooting would occur in the street. The media is going to be made aware of that. Officer has fired, charged his weapon. People in the street would be made aware of that as well.
Exactly. So when there's an officer-involved shooting and the media is made aware of it, kind of everybody knows that this has occurred. And in that context, it's the custom of the department to say, yes, and we're investigating the officers. Is that fair?
Yes, because typically there is awareness about it, broad awareness in the community. When an officer discharges his weapon in the community, there's broad awareness. The media listens to scanners and the like. So yes.
But in this case, since there wasn't any media coverage of the mental health arrest of Mr. Prude and the restraints that were used against him, there was no public announcement of a criminal investigation of police officers. Is that right?
That is correct.
And the only difference between an officer-involved shooting situation where it would be announced and this situation where it wasn't announced is the fact that the media had picked up on what had occurred with respect to Mr. Prude.
I wouldn't categorize it that way. No.
Why not?
Because you're saying that the only reason why it wasn't announced because the media had not picked up on it. No, I wouldn't categorize it that way.
Okay. Well, tell us why you think it wasn't announced other than that reason. Announced publicly, I mean.
There was just no, at that particular point in time, Mr. Prude was still alive during that entire week. Things had taken their course. The investigations were underway, and there was never no conversation about it. April 10th, when I forwarded information to the communications director, Justin Roy, to let him know what the incident was and what the incident was about. He had indicated there was no media inquiries, and if there were, he would work with investigator Frank Camp, who was serving as a public information officer for the department, to do so.
Okay. We've been going about an hour and 20 minutes. Chief Singletary, I'm happy to continue on. Are you good, or do you want to take a few moments?
No, I'm good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Catherine, can you put Exhibit 50 up on the screen? And I'd like you to take us to paragraph 14. Okay. I want to focus your attention, Chief Singletary, on the last sentence of paragraph 14, where on your notice of claim, where you say there was further conversation, and I answered the few questions the mayor asked, who concluded this conversation, asking to keep me in the loop by saying, "Okay, keep me in the loop, Chief." Do you see that?
Yes.
First of all, what do you recall about the further conversation?
It was relative to, the ongoing investigations that we had ordered, or the investigations that we had initiated with regard to Mr. Prude, which was the internal investigation, the criminal review, as well as the circumstances surrounding, Mr. Prude's encounter with Rochester Police.
Did you discuss with her in this conversation anything about whether the officers who were involved would be taken out of public-facing duties during the course of an investigation?
During the initial phone calls?
Yes.
No, we did not.
Right. Did you? Am I correct that you made a decision at some point in time not to take the officers off of public-facing duties during the period of a criminal review and a potential internal review?
That is correct. The command staff and I had several conversations about this. We went back and forth, and I made the decision to not take them off of administrative duty. At that particular point in time, based on the preliminary review, I didn't find anything that warranted such.
Okay. When do you think, Chief, you made that decision?
We had discussions about it that day on March 23rd, and we also had discussions about it March 30th when Mr. Prude passed away. I'm sorry, it would have been the 31st because the next day.
Okay. And among your command staff, was there anyone who took the view that one or more of the three officers who had had hands-on with Mr. Prude should be put on administrative duty and taken off the street?
No.
So your testimony is that the uniform or unanimous position of your command staff was to permit these officers to continue to work on the street.
Correct. After a preliminary review of the incident, watched the body-worn camera video, there was nothing that I found at that particular point in time to take them off the street.
At any point up to, and this is a very long period of time, so I understand if it may take you a minute to think about this, but at any point up to August 4th of 2020, did you have a conversation with the mayor where it was discussed that the officers involved in this incident would remain doing public-facing police work and would not be placed on administrative duty?
Yes.
When was that?
That was September 2nd. We were in the mayor's conference room. It was myself, communications director Roy, the deputy mayor James Smith, and corporation counsel Tim Kurt.
Okay, we'll come to that. And other than what you've already testified to, can you tell us of any, what you recall about other questions the mayor asked during this initial call? Or that is to say, during the second call on March 23rd?
Yeah, we talked about how he was from Chicago. The mayor asked, what Mr. Prude's actions were, the officer's actions were. She asked some clarifying questions with respect to, like I said, the vomiting. We talked about the officers not using any punches, kicks. I made reference to the pig case. I said it wasn't like that. The officers stabilized them. We talked about the spit sock. And I talked about the internal investigations that I had ordered. And I made reference to the documents, like I said, again, in my notice of claim.
Okay. Catherine, can you pull up Exhibit 8 for us? Okay, first page. We're marking, Chief, as Exhibit 8, a document bearing the Bates number Singletary 72 and 73. And I'm focusing really on the second email, which is from Lieutenant Sweatman to you on the 23rd at 4:05. Just a couple clarifying questions. Where it says, Chief, please see the attached IDC and JOB card along with other reports that you received earlier today if you need to reference them for anything. Do you see that?
Yes.
What are IDC and JOBs?
The IDC would have been the interdepartmental correspondence that we reviewed earlier, Lieutenant Sweatman, which would have been the preliminary review, the review that's done within 48 hours. That's the report that I talked about that's not in its finality. It's just a preliminary review, giving me information based on the body-worn camera video or any other video that they may come into encounter with. It could be video from a private residence. It could be video from a commercial establishment, and any reports relating to the incident.
Okay. And the JOB card, what is that?
The job card, it's a electronic printout of the job card or the actual job that the officers respond to. So it has the address of the incident location. It has the officers that responded.
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. It has the what of the, say again, what's the first thing it has?
It has the incident location, which have been Jefferson Avenue. It has the officers who are on the job card. and any other additional responses that 911 dispatcher may have put on the what we call a job card. So it's actually basically a printout of the transactions that occurred that evening or that morning.
We call it a radio run in New York City, but I understand. So the lieutenant says, please advise if you want this to be an internal at this time, or if we're waiting for an update on his status. What did you understand Lieutenant Sweatman to be asking you there?
Whether this is going to be a full-blown investigation at this particular point in time, or was it going to be a preliminary review? There are times where there is a preliminary review conducted and the officers do not find anything wrong. I'm sorry, the sergeants in professional standards sections who are doing the review do not find anything wrong with the conduct of the officers, any violations, policies, or procedures. This case, the prognosis of Mr. Prude was not good, so we wanted to take this serious from the start. So that is why I ordered the internal investigation as well as the criminal review immediately, as we knew that the prognosis was not good, and also as we knew that Mr. Prude had went unconscious at some point due to the officers' involvement with him.
We'll come to some other exhibits later in the day, but it was my understanding from the documents, and you'll tell me if this is wrong, that the internal review by the PSS was put on hold until the criminal review was complete. Is that correct?
So actually, my deputy chief, Mark Simmons, used to get on me all the time about saying this. Both investigations had commenced simultaneously. I used to say that the internal review was not going to commence until after the criminal review was done. And the reason that is, so we have the internal review, and we have the criminal, we have the internal investigation, we have the criminal review. The internal investigation had commenced at the same time that day, March 23rd, up until the point where we interview the officers. The criminal investigation takes precedent over the internal investigation because of Garrity, which means that officers, as you know, which means that officers can be compelled to testify in the professional standards section, which is the internal review. So that's why we don't interview the officers prior to the criminal investigation being complete, because there could be things that are said under compulsion that could interfere with the criminal investigation should criminal charges be brought upon the officer. Case in point, if an officer says something in the internal investigation that is compelled, because they're compelled, because if they don't cooperate, I can fire them.
Mm-hmm.
If the criminal investigation is complete, then the internal would commence with regard to the officers being interviewed. So both investigations were done simultaneously, ordered simultaneously, up until the point where the officers were going to be interviewed.
Understood. Okay, so just so I get it straight in my head, when the internal investigation and the criminal go forward at the same time, the only thing that is held back on the internal PSS investigation is the interview of officers. But if there are other things that need to be done, they are done. Is that fair?
Correct. Gathering paperwork, talking to other individuals involved in the incident. And it's my understanding in this incident, in the internal investigation, that the officers were going to be interviewed, in the criminal, the officers were going to be interviewed sometime in April. But mid-April, the Attorney General's office had took over the investigation from the Marlborough County District Attorney's office.
Understood. Catherine, can you take us to Exhibit 9, please? And this is a one-page document bearing the Bates number Singletary 79. Chief Singletary, this is a text message that was produced, I believe, by your counsel. Between you, Deputy Chief Morbito, and Commander Rivera. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And in this text message, this is the 24th of March. You say, any updated status on our patient from Jefferson Avenue? That's a reference to Mr. Prude, right?
That is correct. I wanted to find out what his status was.
And why were you asking that question?
Just to ask the deputy chief if Mr. Prude was still alive, as we knew his prognosis was not good. It
And
was just a status check for myself.
okay. And that's because it was a very important matter to you, right?
A very important matter.
Yeah. And Deputy Chief Morbito responds, no change. Is that right?
That is correct.
I guess Deputy Chief Murrah is on this chain as well.
Exactly. He was responsible for, he was primarily responsible for the media as well. So I wanted to make sure that he was in the loop.
Okay. You could take that down, Catherine. Chief, I'm gonna ask you, and this will happen throughout the day, some questions from Exhibit 1, just so the committee knows and the public knows. This is a compendium of text messages from the chief's cell phone. I am not going to screen share these portions because there's a lot of private information of people's phone numbers and such. But I am going to be quoting from it from time to time, and I'll ask Chief that you follow along on your hard copy. Is that okay?
Yes.
So I'm looking at, so we've marked as Exhibit 1, a compendium of text messages that runs in the Bates range, Singletary 1 through Singletary 62, and then we have some additional text messages, Singletary 277 through 282. That's just for the record. I'm going to focus your attention for the moment, Chief, on a text message that appears on Singletary 3. It's text message number 5 at the top of the page. Do you see that?
Yes.
And this is a text message from you to Lieutenant Sweatman on March 23rd at 5 p.m. Is that correct?
That is correct.
And just to be clear for the record, that the text actually says 9 p.m., but your counsel has informed me that that's the UTC time and we're going on Eastern Standard, so we subtract 4 hours, right?
That is correct.
Okay. And you texted to Lieutenant Sweatman, quote, point of clarification, parentheses, as we talked about so much today, and parentheses, spoke with the DCA. During the internal, we would interview AMR. We wouldn't interview the brother of the patient as he is high on PCP. Hope that makes sense. Sorry for the confusion earlier. For the criminal, we are not interviewing the AMR folks. Do you see that?
I do.
What were you communicating to Lieutenant Sweatman in that text message?
So these were conversations that we were having earlier on that day. As, like I said, the investigation was hours old. The incident was hours old. And these investigations are fluid. So we were talking about the process for the investigations and the route that they were going to take. Now, ultimately, we did wind up interviewing AMR for the criminal review. So these were just conversations that myself and the DCA, which is Deputy Chief Administration Mark Simmons, at the time were having with respect to figuring out how the investigations were going to go.
Why would you direct Lieutenant Sweatman not to interview the ambulance personnel and not to have the major crimes unit doing the criminal investigation interview the ambulance personnel?
Again, these investigations are fluid, so it was early on in the process. The internal investigation is primarily to see if there's any violations of policy and procedure. If there came a point in time where they did need to interview AMR, that certainly could be done so. But this was a question that came up that day, early on in the day, and we had talked about it, and then obviously clarified later on what we meant.
But just to be clear, as of the point that you sent this message at 5 o'clock on the 23rd, you had determined that the major crimes unit doing the criminal investigation of your officers should not interview the ambulance personnel. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay. And what was the basis for your decision to direct that the MCU not interview the ambulance personnel?
Again, I think it was more so based on the internal review focusing on policy and procedure for the internal aspects of it. But again, we did ultimately wound up interviewing the AMR folks. So there was a myriad of conversations that were had that day. As you can tell, as we talked about so much. I can't recall specifically why, but during the internal investigation, we focused on policy and procedure, conduct of the officers.
Let's go to same exhibit, Singletary 4, and I'm focusing on the text number 8. This is a text message from you to Deputy Chief Morbito on the 26th of March, in which you say, "No change in our Jefferson Avenue dude, question mark." Do you see that?
Yes.
That's you asking Chief Morbito what the status was of Mr. Prude medically. Is that fair?
Correct. Throughout that week, I was continuously asking what was the status of Mr. Prude.
And the response that you got at that point, do you recall it?
I believe it was no change.
Okay. By the way, when you make a decision, as you did here, not to take officers off the street during the pendency of a criminal investigation, is that decision documented anywhere?
No.
Okay, so you don't write a memo or have someone write a memo that here's my thinking on the reasoning for not taking somebody off the street in this kind of situation?
No.
Okay. And that's a decision that rests entirely with you, within your power as chief, right?
That is correct. We looked at the collective bargaining agreement with the locals club, and part of that, making that decision was to place an officer on administrative assignment. There had to be belief or something present that the officer had committed a criminal act. And at that particular point in time, by watching the video, very preliminary, as investigations had not completed, that decision was made to not place the officers on administrative assignment or suspended.
So your understanding of the collective bargaining agreement is that in order for you to exercise your discretion to take a cop off the street, you would have to conclude that he had engaged in criminal conduct?
Well, that's just not the sole factor. There was other factors that went into play, watching the video as well as, the conduct of the officers at the scene. Yes.
Okay. Well, I want to come back to those other factors for a second, but just so I'm clear, what you're telling me now is that one of the reasons that you decided not to take these officers off the street was that the collective bargaining agreement prohibits you from doing so unless you conclude that they have engaged in criminal conduct.
Correct. That was our interpretation of it at the time. Again, during this incident, Mr. Prude early on was still alive. And at the time that we watched the body-worn camera video, we did not find anything at that particular point in time that would warrant such.
And after he died, you didn't change your view and take the officers off the street at that point, right?
Correct.
And it was the same analysis at that point, or did you even do an analysis at that point as to whether to take them off?
Yep. As I testified earlier, we had a discussion the day after that he passed away on the 31st. We did have that discussion.
Okay. And tell me about that discussion. First, the we is you and your command staff, is that right?
Correct.
Was that something you discussed with the mayor?
No.
Okay. And what was the position of the members of your command staff after Mr. Prude died about whether these 3 officers or any one of them should be taken away from public-facing duties?
Their stance has still stayed the same, that we didn't find anything that was outwardly egregious within the video that the officers had conducted. There was no strikes or punches or anything excessive at that particular point in time of the preliminary review. And as I said, the investigations have been ordered, and to my understanding, to this day, the investigations are not complete.
And did you also at that point determine that you were prohibited from taking these officers or any one of them off of public facing duty by the collective bargaining agreement as you interpreted it?
Yes, we did talk about that, yes.
Is there a particular provision or article of the CBA that you think limits your discretion in that way?
We did talk about, I don't recall the exact article, but I know it is in the collective bargaining agreement. It talks about administrative duty.
Okay. Catherine, can you take us to Exhibit 10, please? So we're marking as Exhibit 10, one-page document. Yeah, thank you. Singletary 80. Chief, this is a text message from Chief Morbito to you on March 30th at 11:37 p.m., where he informs you that Mr. Prude has just passed away. Is that right?
That is correct.
And he asks whether there's anything that he and the team need to do that night, and you say, we'll deal with this tomorrow, right?
As stated, I don't believe we need to do anything tonight. I think we've done all that we can do up to this point prior to him being pronounced. We can reassess in the morning. I'll let Sandra know. Sandra, me and the Monroe County District Attorney, know in the morning as she wanted to be in the loop, and I'll let the mayor know the update in the morning.
I'm reminded, you did mention that you had a conversation with the district attorney, the Monroe County DA, Ms. Dorley. The first time you spoke to her, when was that?
I sent her a text message on the evening of the 23rd, whatever, around 3, 4 o'clock. I think the text messages are one of our exhibits. I spoke to her.
And yeah, when did you have a conversation with her?
I had a conversation with her the following day, which had been the 24th.
And tell us about that conversation. What was that about?
I pretty much explained to her the incident that occurred with Mr. Prude on the morning of the 23rd. I went through the details of such. I had ordered an internal and a criminal investigation, and I told her that I wanted her office to be involved in this.
What did she have to say?
She said, absolutely.
Okay. Did District Attorney Dorley make any mention at that point of the fact that the Attorney General's office may have jurisdiction on this matter?
Her and I did briefly discuss that. One, Mr. Prude had not passed away when I talked to her on the 24th. So we did have conversations about that as to whether they were going to take it or not. But at that particular point in time, it was going to be handled by her office.
Was it your understanding, Chief, that the Attorney General's authority would not sort of kick in, that they would not be taking over an investigation unless the person passed away?
That is my understanding.
When you learned that Mr. Prude had passed away from Chief Morbito, did it strike you that now that this issue had reached a level where it was something that should be reported publicly, that there should be a public notification of what had occurred?
It did not.
Why not?
It didn't strike me. When you say strike me, I mean, we always took this incident serious. There just wasn't any conversation that the mayor or I had with regard to releasing this publicly. We just never had the conversation.
Fair enough. I'm really asking about your internal reflections, knowing that this was a major issue in your department. You were keeping careful track of this gentleman's progress or lack of progress medically. You were having conversations, important conversations with your command staff about whether to pull these cops off the street or not. You personally watched the body-worn camera video of the mental health arrest. And all of these things are going on. And I'm just asking whether you, in your own mind, that it ever occurred to you when he died that this is something the public should know.
It never occurred to me.
You can take this down, Catherine. Thank you. Chief Singletary, I want to direct your attention back to Exhibit 1. This is the one that we are not screen sharing, and specifically Singletary 6 on the Bates range and message 19. This is a text message from you to Mayor Warren, correct?
Text message number 6.
I'm sorry, page 6, Singletary 6 is the Bates number, the number that's stamped at the bottom, and it's text number 19 if you look at the side column.
Yes, from me to Mayor Warren.
Okay, and this is a text message that you sent to her on the morning of the 31st of March at 7:28 a.m. Is that correct?
7:28.
Yes.
It's been 8:28 p.m. minus 4 hours.
Oh, my math is terrible. Okay, 8:28. Is this the first time you communicated to the mayor that Mr. Prude had died?
Correct. It says, morning, Mayor. The individual I gave you a briefing about last night. I'm sorry, let me start over. Morning, Mayor. The individual I gave you a briefing about last Monday, in parentheses, gentleman likely high on PCP from Chicago. Doctors pronounced him last night. The cause of death will be determined by the ME's office at some point.
So I want to ask a couple questions about this. First of all, when you refer to the ME's office, that's the medical examiner, right?
That is correct.
What brought you to the conclusion that the medical examiner would be involved in this matter?
To determine the cause of death.
I'm sorry, I couldn't hear you.
To determine the cause of death.
Okay. And you knew at this point that this was an issue that was going to be looked at by the medical examiner's office because this was not a natural death. Is that fair?
That is correct.
Okay. And did you consider it to be significant that the medical examiner's office was going to look at this matter?
Well, the medical examiners looks at deaths that are unattended or that we don't know the true cause of such. And this incident had special circumstances given the fact that police officers were involved in this incident. That's
Okay.
why we took it very serious. That's why I notified the mayor about such.
And you would agree that telling the mayor that the medical examiner's office was going to look at this was a way for you to communicate that this was an important and serious matter from your perspective.
That is correct. The medical examiner's office taking a look at this certainly would have determined the cause of death. At that particular point in time, we didn't know what the cause of death was that morning. And knowing that the police officers were involved in this incident, that was a special circumstances as to why I even alerted the mayor in the initial. Unfortunately, you know, there are overdoses that occur within the city of Rochester, drug overdoses. This one was never described by me, nor is it written anywhere in a report that I can find. It certainly has been attested to me that I described it as a drug overdose, but never did I ever state that this was a drug overdose. The reason for me notifying the mayor was because that police officers were involved in this incident, and there are police officers that respond to overdoses in the city of Rochester that occur, that are fatal, that I do not notify the mayor about. This one I did notify the mayor about because police officers have physical contact with Mr. Prude.
Understood. In other cases where there are overdoses and people die, those cases are subject to review by the medical examiner, right?
That is correct.
One of the ways that you strike that, in this text message, you're describing the Prude matter by saying it's the gentleman likely high on PCP, right? So that's a reference to his having, from your perspective or belief, having used PCP prior to his death.
That is correct. Based on the reports based on the information that was received from family as well.
Okay. But I guess what I'm saying is that the reference to the fact that he took PCP was kind of a shorthand that you used to describe this person.
Correct.
Okay. Um,
Mr. Celli, at a convenient point, I will need a break soon.
okay. This may be it. Let me just see here.
Okay.
I think we should probably stop here because I'm going to go into another area, and I'd prefer. Is that okay, Councilmember Patterson and Councilmember Evans, if we take 10 minutes or so?
I concur with a 10-minute break. Councilmember Evans, do you concur?
I concur, council member.
All right.
All right, so it is, we're just gonna say it's 11:30 now. Let's be back by 11:40.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, folks, we're about a minute from reconvening. If we could have everybody come back on, and those who are participating, please turn your cameras on so we can get a quick census.
Mr. Celli,
Yes.
I didn't get an address for the witness. I don't know if you want to do that.
Let- Let's do that at his attorney's office. I don't want to.
That's why I didn't ask it. But would you like me to leave it out? Just leave it out?
Yeah, you can ask his counsel, but I think getting him any copy and should all be done through counsel anyways.
Okay, so I had, okay, so, all right. We'll do that off the record if they want me to provide otherwise.
Right, exactly. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Sorry.
Thank you. We'll take it off the record. We'll
Okay.
get it to you.
Yes,
folks.
I just didn't want to ask it in the public forum.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Mr. Getz, Mr. Talon, Mr. Singletary, let us know when you're ready.
We're ready. I think my camera is being operated by the host.
Katie, can we get Mr. Singletary's camera back up?
It just says,
Yes, one
can I start
second.
the host?
Councilmember Evans, are you ready, sir?
Yes, council member, thank you.
Okay. Well, Mr. Celli, when you're ready, we will resume. When everybody's ready, we'll
Oh, I
resume.
thought I was writing this. Okay. I thought we were kind of on.
You're all right. You're all right.
Chief Singletary, are you ready to continue?
I am, thank you.
All right, then let's resume. Councilmember Evans, do you concur?
I concur, sir. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, folks. We're back in.
Thank you. Chief Singletary, when you were serving in the role of chief, did you have a practice of reporting significant events involving the police department to the mayor?
Yes.
And how would you define the kinds of events that you would report to the mayor during your tenure as mayor? And let's limit it to the period leading up to March 23rd, 2020.
So I would notify the mayor on all homicides, and the primary method of communication between the mayor and I would be via text, phone call, or face-to-face, but due to the pandemic, that was limited to Zoom meetings based on our one-on-ones. Email sometimes, but if I wanted her to know something right away, it was obviously via text. Sometimes emails wouldn't be answered right away. But there would be homicides, significant officers who were maybe been injured in the line of duty, as well as, if there were issues in the community that I think would be of concern to the mayor. The mayor was obviously always alert as to what was going on in the community. Sometimes she would ask me certain things and I would follow up on them, or she would get a complaint from someone in the community and I would follow up on such.
How about situations where there were civilian videos that involved encounters between RPD and civilians? Is that something that you would determine to be significant and let her know about?
Well, a lot of times the videos would either go viral on Facebook, and again, the mayor had her ear to the ground. She would sometimes reach out to me initially, as well as other people in the community as well. So, so I would either send her information on it, or she would send me information on it to follow up. I would send her information as an FYI, or she would send me information to look into it, and I would say we are already looking into such.
And was there so you said that generally you would send her text messages, sometimes emails. Were there occasions when you would report significant events to the mayor verbally rather than through text or email?
Yes.
And what kinds of circumstances would call for a verbal as opposed to a text or email or memo, I suppose?
It varied. on time of day or the incident. The mayor and I communicated often.
In this case, you did not provide in the March 2020 period a detailed or even remotely detailed description of the mental health arrest of Mr. Prude in writing, either by text or by email, to Mayor Warren. Do you agree with that?
Yeah, the mayor and I had conversation about this incident, and based on my discussions with her, I fully briefed her on the incident, and if she had questions on it, she would have followed up.
Fair enough. I guess that I'll just frame the question. Why didn't you provide a written description of what had occurred so that there would be a record of what you told the mayor about the Prude mental health arrest?
There was no record ever requested by the mayor. There was the phone conversations that her and I had about this incident. And like I said, the mayor and I were on the phone. If there was something that needed to be clarified or followed up, or if the mayor wanted a report, she would have directed me to do so.
Is it your testimony that you would only provide a written report or written statement, whether in text or email or just a regular memo, about a significant event if the mayor asked you to provide that? In other words, that you never provided it just in order to have done so?
Sometimes I would have. It could have been to clarify something. There was really no hard, fast rule. I think that's what you're trying to get at. There was no hard, fast rule as to whether the mayor or I, how we communicated.
Given the nature of the Prude mental health arrest and the fact that police officers were involved in a situation where somebody became unconscious and was likely to die, did you determine or make a decision around March 23rd not to create a writing as to what your understanding of the facts were?
No, there was no conscious decision.
Did anybody ever say to you, maybe somebody from the command staff or anybody else say, look, let's not create anything in writing for anybody about this in terms of communicating it to the mayor because this is a serious incident? There might be consequences.
No, those conversations were never had.
Okay. Does anybody strike that when you were chief, did anybody other than you have responsibility for reporting significant issues or incidents to the mayor?
No.
By that, I mean incidents involving the police department, obviously.
Unless they were in an acting capacity, or if the mayor may have reached out to them. But no, primarily it was my responsibility.
So there was a period of time, I can't remember, sometime I think in September, where you briefly relinquished command to one of your deputy chiefs, right?
That is correct.
And for that period of time, it would have been that deputy chief's function to report any significant events to the mayor, right?
That is correct.
Okay. But as long as you were chief and fully in your role as chief and hadn't passed on the baton for a limited period of time to one of your deputies, it was your job to report significant events to the mayor.
Correct.
And other than you reporting directly to the mayor, was there any other mechanism or means by which you would get information to her? So, for example, through somebody else on her staff or some other means?
No, I reported to the mayor. The mayor and I pretty much communicated between her and I.
Okay. So
unless she was on vacation or out of town, and there was someone filling in her role, and there had to be something that would rise to that level where the mayor would be need to be made aware of.
Okay. So it wasn't as if the mayor said to you, look, if something important happens, unless it's really critical, talk to the deputy mayor or speak to Justin Roy or talk to Mr. Udelson and, fill them in, and then we'll determine whether you and I need to have a direct conversation.
No, my primary communication was with the mayor. There were times where I would let other members in the administration know what was going on if the incident affected them
I'm
or
sorry.
their shop.
la-
If
la-
the incident affected them or their shop,
Got it.
Them or their
Shop.
their
shop.
their department.
You mentioned that one of the significant events that you would report to the mayor would be if there was a homicide in the city, correct?
Correct. If there was a homicide in the city, we would receive a phone call from the emergency communications department. We would also receive a text message from the emergency communications department. And I would receive a phone call from the deputy chief of operations with some details about the homicide, which I then in turn would relay that information to the mayor. Primary method of communication with that was text message. There would be times where may have rolled up on a crime scene, arrived on a crime scene, and it was during the middle of the day or afternoon or evening, and I would have called the mayor sometimes. But the primary method of communication of notification for a homicide was a text message, primarily specifically if it was after 11 p.m. I rarely called her for a homicide notified after 11 p.m. It was always text message.
And one of the things that the mayor did in her role as mayor was that she would reach out to the next of kin to homicide victims to express her condolences about the loss, right?
Yeah, there was a point in time during my tenure in chief that she did express to me that she wanted the next of kin contact information, which I would provide to her via email, as it was not an urgent correspondence that needed a reply from the mayor to me. So it was pretty much that method was email, because it was not necessary that I needed a response back or urgent matter. It was just relaying information about the victim's next of kin. And I also did that for the vice president of city council.
Right. And you learned on or about April 10th that Mr. Prude's death had been determined by the medical examiner to be a homicide, correct?
On April 10th, we did learn that Mr. Prude's death, the manner was determined to be a homicide.
Mm-hmm. And did you ever communicate to Mayor Warren or Vice Chair Lightfoot of the City Council the next of kin information for Mr. Prude prior to September 2nd, 2020?
Yes, I do believe Council Member Lightfoot did ask me for contact information for Mr. Prude.
And that was after September 2nd, 2020, which is when the body-worn camera video footage was released and there was a press conference by the Prude family, correct?
It may have been, I don't remember the exact date.
Did you ever notify the mayor that Mr. Prude had been a homicide victim, and here were the names of his next of kin in case she wanted to extend her condolences to them?
No.
Why not?
She didn't ask for the next of kin for that incident.
But you had a practice, you would agree, of telling her if there was a homicide in the city who the next of kin were, so that she could notify that or express her condolences. She just didn't follow that practice in this case. Is that correct?
Yeah, in this case, the homicide determination came April 10th based on information that I had received. But yes, she never did ask for such.
And you didn't offer it to her, right?
Correct.
And there were times when you were chief that you would write to the mayor and describe the circumstances of a police encounter with a civilian where that encounter had been captured on civilian video and posted on the internet, right?
Yes, there were times where video did go, viral that occurred within the city that either the mayor became aware of or I became aware of, and the mayor would ask for a follow-up, and I will look into it and get back to her. Got
it. So let's, Catherine, go to Exhibit 22A, please. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, Chief Singletary, but this is a document that we're marking as Exhibit 22A. It's Singletary 276. This is an email from May 11th from you to Mayor Warren, in which you are communicating to her about an incident that was caught on civilian video and posted on Facebook, correct?
That is correct.
And here you give a rather detailed description of the conduct of the officers. You talk about the fact that there's going to be a review by the professional standards section of the officer's conduct, the need for training, and so on. Why did you provide this written description of this whole incident to the mayor in May of 2020?
The mayor wanted follow-up with regard to this incident, and I provided her an email for the follow-up.
Okay. Did she ask you to write her an email about this particular incident?
No, again, there was no hard and fast rule as to how the mayor and I communicated. This would not have warranted a response that was urgent, so I replied to her in an email.
Okay, but I don't want to lose the thread here. I'm just curious. Did you write this email because she said, I need you to give me the story, chapter and verse in writing, and so that then you wrote an email, or did you just decide to provide her with all this information and you selected email as the method?
Well, when you say all this information, the mayor wanted a follow-up, and what I did was provide her the specifics of the information as she had requested, and based on the Facebook video that had kind of went viral. Her and I had talked about this incident on the phone as well.
So when you say the mayor had wanted a follow-up, tell me what you mean by that.
She wanted to know what occurred in this incident. There was a Facebook video that she had saw on Facebook, and she wanted to know what occurred at this incident.
And had you notified her of the incident in the first instance by text or call or email saying, look, there's this Facebook video that's out there and I want you to know about it? And then she said, follow up? Or had she seen it or been shown it prior to you were telling her about it?
She had seen it, and I think there were members of council who had saw the video as well. And what was the other part of your question?
So you're saying that she asked you to provide more detail about this particular?
Well, she saw the initial video and asked me to look into it, and this is what I provided her.
Got it. Okay. Catherine, can you put Exhibit 22 up now? So this is Exhibit 22. It's Singletary 110 through 112. Catherine, if you could go to the third page of the exhibit. So here we have, again, May 11th, 2020 at 4:48 p.m. This is an email from you to Councilmember Lightfoot, where you're saying, I just want to follow up with you regarding the Facebook, which you and I had a discussion about. And then, in fact, it's the same incident that's referred to in 22A. Do you see that?
You said 4:48 p.m.
I'm sorry, say again?
Yes, 4:48 p.m.
4:48 p.m. I'm not seeing that on
It's the last page of the exhibit.
Okay, I see it now.
And this is the same incident that's referred to in Exhibit 22 that we just looked at, right?
That is correct.
22A. And my question to you is, when you wrote this email to Mr. Lightfoot on the 11th of May at 4:48, was this a situation where you had alerted him to the existence of this incident and the Facebook video, or had he asked you a question about it, or was there some other way that this chain got started?
I think he had asked me a question about it, as I wanted to follow up with him regarding it. This was a video that had went viral around the city of Rochester. The mayor was aware of it. City council members were aware of it. and the vice president asked for a follow-up. So I sent him a follow-up similar to what I had sent the mayor.
Got it. And in the context of, strike that, I noticed that on the second page of the exhibit, which is Singletary 11, Councilmember Lupien poses a question to Councilmember Lightfoot, and I guess that gets forwarded to you with an FYI. Do you see that?
What's the question? The question is, do the police need a warrant to enter an address, not just a warrant for arrest?
Right. She asked that question of Mr. Lightfoot, and then at 7:26 p.m., he forwards you that question, correct?
Correct.
I'm just wondering, and then you answer that question in some detail at 7:37 p.m. that night, right?
That is correct.
And is there some reason why you did not copy Councilmember Lupien on your email, that you only communicated with Councilmember Lightfoot here?
Yes, there was a protocol that was put in place where, the vice president of public safety, Willie Lightfoot is the vice president of public safety. Throughout my tenure as chief, but for the latter half, the mayor made it clear that she wanted certain communications to go through certain people on city council. Willie Lightfoot is the chair of the Public Safety Committee. So I responded back to him, who in turn would respond back to Mary Lou.
Got it. And when did the mayor put that protocol in place?
I don't remember the exact date that the mayor put that protocol in place, but it was several discussions among the senior management team. And I remember that these discussions were had early on because we were still face-to-face meeting in the mayor's conference room on the 3rd floor. So it was sometime before the pandemic. And these conversations continue to be had as there were several city council members who would continue to reach out to department heads, and the mayor wanted a specific protocol to be followed.
Got it. And did you ever have the occasion of Councilmember Lightfoot, or Vice Chair, I should say, Lightfoot, asking you directly about a police-civilian encounter that he had become aware of, and you before you had notified him? In other words, that he stimulated a question about something and then you responded to him?
He would stimulate a question about something and I respond to him?
Right, as opposed
Yes.
to you notifying him and then him following up.
Correct.
So there were situations where he would call you and say, or email or text you and say, I heard about this situation. What can you tell me? And you would respond to that, right?
Yes.
And were there situations where Councilmember Lightfoot would come to you with a question like that, where it was your understanding that he was bringing the question forward because another member of council wanted that information, not necessarily himself?
Yes, there were times. Yes, absolutely.
And when that would happen, would it be your practice to respond to Councilmember Lightfoot, or to him and the other council member, or something else?
It would be my practice primarily to respond back to Councilmember Lightfoot. Again, this was a fluid process throughout, but we had several members of City Council, when they were elected, that reached out to department heads right away, and this is when the protocol kind of went into place. But there were, initially out of respect for the council, we would respond back until they became sometimes overburdened.
Mm-hmm. And when was that?
It depended on certain departments. My department, it depends on what the topic was. Did not receive burdensome emails from City Council. At times we did, so it varied. So I can't really give you a specific date on such.
Catherine, you could take this one down. Did you ever have a conversation prior to March 23rd? Strike that. Did you ever have a conversation or communication prior to September 2nd, 2020, with Vice Chair Lightfoot about the circumstances in which he would have expected you as the police chief to notify him about significant matters that had occurred with respect to the police department.
When Vice President Lightfoot, I think, became the chair, we had initially one-on-one meetings, then Deputy Chief Simmons would take over.
If something really serious happens where there are allegations of misconduct by members of the department, I'm going to expect you to tell me that directly, whether or not however you deal with the mayor. Since I'm the chair of the Public Safety Committee, I want you to inform me of that.
No, we really didn't have a formal conversation in the sense. The vice president will reach out to me via text or phone call. There are times where he saw several police cars in the neighborhood as he has a business on Jefferson Avenue, where he would just call me up, Chief, what's going on Jefferson Avenue? Chief, what's going on over here? Or there was an incident that he had at his building one night, I remember, where he called me. We had text communication about an incident that was going on behind his building. But there was really no hard, fast rule as to how we communicated. I mean, we just had an open communication about whatever topics there was.
I'll move on from this topic, but just to close the loop, did you ever have a conversation with Councilmember Lightfoot where he said, Chief, you really should have called me about this. I hear X, Y, and Z happened, and this is the kind of thing you really need to tell me about. I don't want to have to hear it from other people.
Are you referring to a specific incident or
I'm
just
asking
in general terms?
General question.
No.
Okay. Catherine, let's go to Exhibit 14, please. So this is a one-page exhibit, Exhibit 14, Singletary 86. Can you identify this document, Chief Singletary?
Yeah, this is a text message. It looks like a text message.
Do you know who it's to?
That I don't see any information on it that would describe who it's to.
And is this is a message that you wrote?
Without seeing the entire text message or any context behind it, I'm not sure.
All right, well, you can put that to one side. Let me ask one other question. Does the term MCAC mean anything to you?
MCAC?
Yeah.
MCAC? Moral Crime Analysis Center?
What is that?
Crime Analysis Center is a entity within the police department that several police departments around the county staff, and it's where we gather intelligence and other information, and we utilize them, for certain crime strategies.
Do you believe that this reference to a lawsuit coming from Jefferson, that's a reference to the Prude matter?
Yes.
And do you recall learning in early April that there was video of Mr. Prude on the night that he was encountered by police, and that video had been posted to Facebook?
Correct. I think that was a Facebook video. Yes.
Right. And did the fact that there was a publicly posted Facebook video about the Prude matter cause you to think that this is something that should be discussed more publicly than it had been up to that point?
Or to April 3rd?
Yes.
Repeat the question again.
Yeah, I mean, as you sit here now, you recall that at or about this time, you were aware that there was a publicly posted Facebook video of Mr. Prude on the night that he encountered the police, right?
Correct.
And my question is, having learned that at that time, did it cause you to think that as in other cases where Facebook video had led to a public discussion of the conduct of police, that this matter of the Prude arrest should be more publicly, more widely known or more widely disclosed.
No, there were several videos that went viral around Rochester that we did not hold a press conference on or publicly disclose.
Okay. How about offering public comments? Were there videos that went viral that you simply declined to comment on?
Well, I mean, when asked, we would comment on.
I see.
I mean, you're giving me like hypotheticals, so I'm trying to answer them the best way I can without having gone through that situation that you're talking about.
Well, let me ask it a different way. Was it the practice of the department during your tenure not to publicly disclose or comment on incidents prior to being asked about them by the media or by civilians?
No, there were times we would be proactive and such. Where there were times we would be proactive in notifying the media on certain things. One of which I remember was an incident over on Bay and Goodman, where there's a video that
I'm sorry, say again.
An incident at Bay and Goodman where there was a video that had went viral.
That was an incident where a person was alleged to have been acting erratically. Police responded and a civilian videotaped that, and the civilian was arrested, correct?
Correct. It was a mental hygiene arrest, and the civilian was arrested for video recording the incident. And I think I came in that day and we held a press conference, talked to the mayor. The mayor was aware of it. Like I said, the video was going viral on Facebook. And that's when I came in and held a press conference, looked at the video, looked at reports, and we had, I ultimately dropped the charges against that individual.
Got it. Okay, Catherine, you can take that down. And please post Exhibit 17. Actually, please post 3A. Let's do that first. This is a multi-page exhibit, Singletary 283 through 293. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on it, Chief. Just wanted to ask you, you're familiar with this document, the Nightly Violence Summary?
Yes, I am familiar with that document. I don't have that document as part of my package, but I am familiar with that.
Okay, and what is a Nightly Violence Summary?
The Nightly Violence Summary is a report that's generated nightly from MCAC, and it talks about the incidents that occur over the 24 hours, incidents that require notification to the command staff.
Got it. And what are the criteria by which incidents make it onto the Nightly Violence Summary?
There is a whole list of criteria that is documented. Primarily, it would be shootings, it would be homicides, similar to the things that you see in the exhibit, shots fired incidents, robberies, sometimes officer injuries. A lot of times those went through email.
Okay. Would you have expected the mental health arrest of Mr. Prude and Mr. Prude's conduct before the mental health arrest in terms of throwing things through windows and running around in a very ill state, that would appear on a Nightly Violence Summary?
No, mental hygiene arrests rarely appeared on, if at all, on the Nightly Violence Summary.
Are there written criteria for what goes on to the Nightly Violence Summary?
There is.
And that's something that MCAC keeps?
They may have a copy of it, but this is a report that's generated by information that's notated on the staff duty report.
So if I told you that this particular set of Nightly Violence Summaries which cover the period of March 23rd, 2020, does not reflect the Prude arrest. Would you be surprised to hear that?
No.
Why not?
Mr. Prude, at the time, this was a mental hygiene arrest. Mr. Prude was still alive during this time. So that would not surprise me that it's not on the MCAC report. As I stated, mental hygiene arrests typically did not make it on the nightly violence reports.
Let's go to Catherine, Exhibit 17, please. This is a two-page, you can go to the first page, Exhibit Singletary 90 and 91. Chief Singletary, an email at the top from Deputy Chief Simmons to you and others, and it's attaching a chain of emails. I'm focusing on the one from Lieutenant Perkowski on Friday, April 3rd at 1:28 p.m., which it appears was forwarded to you on the 6th. Do you see that?
That's correct.
Okay.
I see it.
And who is Jeff Waiter?
Jeff Waiter is a sergeant in the Rochester Police Department.
And is he a union representative
Yes, I believe at the time he was a union representative.
of the Rochester Police Locust Club, right?
That is correct.
And you see that Lieutenant Perkowski is reporting on the second page of the exhibit, Catherine. All reports and BWC video has been given to the Locust Club. Do you see that?
Yes.
And would you agree that as of this, at least April 6th, you were aware that the body-worn camera video footage from the Prude mental health arrest had been given to the Police Locust Club?
Yes, it was customary for the Locust Club to ask for body-worn camera video on various incidents, and this happened customarily.
Before the body-worn camera video was shipped over to the Locust Club, were you informed that they'd made a request?
The Deputy Chief Simmons would typically make me aware, sometimes verbally in passing, that the Locust Club, FYI, the Locust Club reached out to this for this video.
Right. I guess I'm asking whether you recall specifically in this situation, whether you were aware that they had asked for this footage.
I'm pretty sure Deputy Chief Simmons would have made me aware.
Okay. And did you communicate the fact that the body-worn camera footage had been requested by the Locust Club? Did you tell anybody in the mayor's office, either the mayor or the deputy mayor, Mr. Roy, about that request?
No, like I said, this was a customary request that the Locust Club, in the event of their reputation or representing their members, would ask for body-worn camera video. This was not something that I would make the mayor's office aware of during the course of business.
Why is that? Because it was routine? Is that what you're saying? I'm sorry, you got cut off there.
Correct. As I stated, it was customary. It was routine.
Okay. Thank you, Catherine. You could take that down. And let's go to Exhibit 15, please. To the first page. So, Chief Singletary, I'm going to show you what we've marked as Exhibit 15, which is a 3-page document, Singletary 87 to 89. Actually, I take that back. Catherine, can you actually post 13 for me? So this is a 2-page exhibit, Exhibit 13, Singletary 84 and 85. And it's an email chain starting about a third of the way down on the first page between you on the one hand and Patrick Beef, copied to Willie Jackson and others regarding preservation letter. Do you see that?
I do.
And the subject is preservation letter incident between RPD and Daniel Prude, correct?
That is correct.
And, we've redacted some of this material because of potential privilege. But I now want to take you back to Exhibit 15. And point out to you that the ray line on your exchange with Deputy Chief Simmons is the same, preservation letter incident between RPD and Daniel Prude. Do you see that?
Correct.
And this is a message, there's a message here from Mark Simmons, Friday, April 3rd at 12:11 p.m. And he says, "We knew this was coming, no surprise." Do you see that?
Correct.
What did you understand Chief Simmons to be saying to you?
That we knew that there might be potential of a lawsuit possibly coming because we had received the preservation letter, and that we had not known the exact cause of death of Mr. Prude at that particular point in time. We knew that the ME's office would be conducting an autopsy to determine the exact cause of death, knowing that their officers had physical contact with Mr. Prude. There was a possibility that the ME's office may rule one way or the other.
And a preservation request, as you understood it, is a request for the department or the city to maintain and preserve for future potential involvement with the litigation documents and evidentiary material. Is that correct?
Correct. And upon receiving this request, what I did was I notified Tim Curtin that morning on April 3rd at 11:52. I sent him a text, and I think my attorney shared that.
I think we don't need to hear specifically what you communicated with Mr. Curtin. I can ask it in other ways and avoid the dispute. When you said in response to Mr. Simmons, indeed, were you communicating to him that you were not at all surprised that the prospect of a claim being lodged against the city on behalf of Mr. Prude and his family, that you weren't surprised by that?
Well, we did not know the cause of death at this particular point in time, and we knew that the officers were involved. So yeah, we kind of, we didn't know for sure. So once we got the preservation letter, we kind of knew that was a possibility.
Right. You saw it coming that the family of Mr. Prude was likely to make a claim against the city at that point. Is that fair?
Correct.
Okay. And did the fact that the family had provided a preservation letter and thereby alerted you to the possibility of there being a legal claim against the city arising from the Prude death, did that play any role in any decision not to notify the public that Mr. Prude had died in the course of the mental health arrest while being restrained by RPD officers?
Did that play any role, what, the preservation letter being received?
Yeah.
No.
Knowledge that the family was considering bringing a lawsuit or a claim against the city?
No, our investigations were still going forward. We did everything that we needed to do internally with regard to ordering the internal investigation, the criminal investigation. So things were moving forward as we had in any other case, officer involved shooting, or as customary for an in custody serious situations such as this, which is the ordering of the internal reviews. So to answer your question, no.
Did you learn in early April of 2020 that the family of Mr. Prude, through counsel, had made a Freedom of Information law request for information about Mr. Prude's treatment at the hands of police, including the body-worn camera footage?
Yes, I believe there were some emails that had went back and forth, and also, through talking, Corporation Counsel and I had conversation about the preservation letter on April 3rd, where we had a conversation about the instance of Mr. Prude incident on March 23rd. And I let Corporation Counsel know about the matters and the specifics of the incident on March 23rd via the text message that my attorney sent to you yesterday.
w- Let's look at Catherine, Exhibit 25, please. And while Catherine's pulling that up, Chief, did the fact that a FOIL request had been made by the Prude family's attorney play any role in the decision not to notify the public of the circumstances of Mr. Prude's mental health arrest?
No.
Okay. Catherine, if you go to the first page of the exhibit, it's Exhibit 25, Singletary 115 to 117. Subject line here, Chief, is good morning. This FOIL request will be forwarded to law and BWC. And that's an email from you to Deputy Chief Morbito, correct?
Correct.
Now in this, and this is May 21st, right?
Yep, that's what the email says.
Right. And do you remember sending this email?
Yes, I mean, it's an email from my address.
Okay. I mean, this is something you wrote. I mean, you don't doubt that, right?
Correct.
Okay. And when you say in your email, quote, the BWC unit can begin to prepare any and all BWC footage with the required redactions related to the below incident. What are you referring to there when you talk about redactions?
Not sure if this was related to the Prude matter or if it was related to the 10-year-old handcuffing incident on Route 104. If I had the text below, this is redacted, so I'm not sure what those two sentences that I sent to Joe Morbito, I can't remember what it was in reference to. This is around the same time, I believe, that the 10-year-old was being handcuffed on Route 104. We had that incident, but I don't remember if it was referring to that incident or Mr. Prude's based on the redaction in the email.
Okay. Fair enough. Let's go, Catherine, to Exhibit 23, please. So this is an email that you sent to Mayor Warren on the 19th of May regarding an incident where a child was put in handcuffs by members of RPD, correct?
Correct.
And in this email, you go into a fair amount of detail about the policy with respect to handcuffing children, and you point out specific conduct that appears on two different body-worn camera videos, correct? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the answer.
Yes. I'm sorry, yes.
Right. And you actually forwarded the mayor the full body-worn camera videos from Officer Leach and Officer Merklinger that involved this issue with handcuffing the child, right?
That is correct. That was at the mayor's request.
Yeah, so that was my question, is how did this particular email come to be?
This was an incident that had went viral in our community. It caused quite a bit of stir in the community. The mayor was aware of it. We had conversations at senior management team. I think the mayor, the deputy mayor, corporation council. We talked about the mayor wanting to do a press conference. At some point we did. And this email came about because there was conversation with the mayor on the SMT, senior management team meeting after the meeting, where the mayor wanted to come up with a blanket policy. And I told the mayor I didn't agree with that. And I sent the mayor an email for clarification and follow-up.
A blanket policy of not handcuffing children?
Correct.
Got it. Catherine, let's go to Exhibit 29, please. Chief, you referred earlier to an incident at Bay and Goodman. That was an incident in late June of 2020 where a man was found to be acting erratically on Bay Street. The police encountered him and there was a civilian who made a video of that, right?
Correct.
And on that occasion, you saw fit to have a press conference about conduct of police and to actually reverse an arrest, right?
When you say I saw fit, the mayor directed me to have a press conference. I think the mayor was out of town on this day, and she called me. I remember having a conversation with the deputy mayor, and I went into the office that day. The mayor said, we got to get ahead of this. I want a press conference, which we had not already gotten ahead of because it already went viral on Facebook, and the media had already been made aware of such as well.
Got it. And in the context of the mayor directing you to have a press conference about an incident where somebody was acting erratically and the police were involved with that person, did it occur to you that there ought to be some further public discussion of the Prude mental health arrest?
This incident occurred, I think it was
June of 2020.
stated. Yes, okay, the dates on it confused me, December 19th, 2020. But yes, this occurred June 28th, 2020. And you're asking me if that incident prompted me to have a press conference about Prude.
Well, to think about it, in other words, did it sort of bring to mind the fact that there was another mental health arrest that had happened a few months before, it had resulted in the death of a man. There was a criminal investigation, an internal PSS investigation, and it had not been publicly announced. Did it strike you when this incident involving a mental health encounter occurred that maybe the Prude issue should also be brought to the public's attention?
No, it didn't dawn on me at the time, at the particular point in time, and I didn't cross-reference the two cases.
Okay.
In this incident, no one had died in this incident, but no, I didn't cross-reference the two cases.
Right. Okay. Did you announce in connection with the Bay Street incident in June of 2020 that there was a professional standards section internal investigation or a criminal investigation of the officer's conduct?
There was a professional standards section investigation.
I'm sorry, could you repeat again?
There was a professional standards section investigation, which was an internal investigation to determine whether the officers violated policy or procedures.
Right. And did you announce that when you gave the press conference that the mayor directed you to?
Yes.
There's no rule against announcing that kind of investigation publicly, right?
No, this was something that the mayor had directed me to.
Did you tell her that you felt there was a rule that would prohibit making an announcement like that?
No.
Because there wasn't one, right?
No.
Let's go to Exhibit 30. Catherine? This is a one-page email that you sent to the deputy mayor and also to Mayor Warren on July 6th, where you are reporting that a person who was shot in Rochester in 2017 died on June 30th of 2020. And you make the point that the medical examiner had ruled this death to be a homicide and that it would count towards the numbers for the city of Rochester for 2020. Do you see that?
I do.
And did you have a conversation with the mayor about this email?
No, this was basically a homicide notify. The incident.
I'm sorry, a homicide
A homicide notification.
or notify.
Yeah, a notify that did not require an immediate response. This was an individual who was shot back in 2017 and died in the year June 2020 and would count as a homicide for this year. And so as in practice, I would make the mayor aware of homicides.
Right. Do you know whether Mayor Warren contacted the family of the victim that's referred to in this email?
I don't remember if I sent her an email or not about this person's next of kin. I don't believe she probably would have. The incident happened 3 years ago, but I don't believe. she did.
Did the Prude homicide count towards the homicides in the city of Rochester for the year 2020?
I believe so. It would have been a homicide.
And is it your recollection that Mayor Warren, as part of her duties as mayor, would keep track in general of the number of homicides that had occurred in the city of Rochester during a particular year?
There was times where Mayor Warren would ask me how many homicides we were at. And there was time, I remember one time where she did ask me for the names of homicide individuals. I think she was prepping something for city council. But yeah, the mayor and I would talk during our monthly one-on-ones about homicides. That was always a standing subject that we discussed. Part of that discussion was the number of homicides that were open, the number of homicides that were closed, the recent homicides that had just occurred, and the ones that we were following up on. So yeah, I mean, the mayor and I had conversations about homicides all the time.
And I presume each homicide, from your perspective, was important to the mayor, right?
Absolutely, as they should, as important to me as well.
Right. And you would agree that the Prude homicide was also important to you?
Absolutely, because this was an incident that occurred with special circumstances, because there were police officers involved in this incident prior to us knowing that, obviously there really was a homicide.
Right. Well, the police officers caused the death, right?
Correct.
Yeah. Do you recall seeing coverage, I'm sure you do, but I have to ask it this way, of the death of George Floyd in Minneapolis, Minnesota?
Yes.
And I'm going to represent to you that the death occurred on May 25th, 2020, and that video of Mr. Floyd being restrained and ultimately killed circulated in the day or two after that. Okay. Is that consistent with your recollection?
The video of Mr. Prude circulated the day or two after the death of Mr. Floyd?
I'm sorry. If I said that, that's not what I meant. What I meant was that Mr. Floyd was killed on May 25th, 2020, and that the video of Mr. Floyd being restrained and ultimately killed by Minneapolis police circulated nationally in the day or two that followed Mr. Floyd's death. I'm sorry, I didn't get an answer.
I said, okay.
Okay, is that consistent with your recollection?
I don't remember.
Okay. But you remember that in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death, there were demonstrations throughout the country about police misconduct and the Floyd killing, right?
Yes.
And those demonstrations, there were demonstrations in Rochester as well, of course, about this.
Correct.
And that's something that your department responded to in the ordinary course. Is that fair?
Yes, there was a lot of things going on during that time. You had Mr. Prude's incident, like you said, the George Floyd incident, and the pandemic obviously going on. So yes, there were a number of things that we were dealing with. But with those number of things that we were dealing with, this incident, we took very seriously, handled it as we would have any other incident.
Catherine, you can take the exhibit down. Thank you. Well, do you recall any discussions among any city officials or employees in the wake of Mr. Floyd's death, which occurred on May 25th, 2020, and prior to August 4th, 2020, where the fact of Mr. Floyd's death and the ensuing demonstrations were compared or connected in any way with the Prude mental health arrest and Mr. Prude's death?
Are you asking me, do we make comparisons between the two?
I'm asking whether in the course of your work as the chief during that period, from the end of May to the beginning of August, you were present for or are aware of any discussions where those two incidents were compared and put together and discussed as being similar.
I think there were conversations that were had, yes.
Okay, and what do you recall about those conversations? Who was involved and what was said?
There was conversations toward the end, like around September and August, where
I want to
the
focus, I don't mean to interrupt you, Chief, but I just want to focus you on the period from May 25th to August 4th. What do you
yes,
recall about conversations in that period?
yes, I think there were the FOIL requests. There was conversations with regard to what was going around nationally, and the FOIL requests being received.
And other than conversations that related to the FOIL requests for documents relating to the Prude mental health arrest, do you recall anybody else within city government talking about Prude in the context of Floyd and the demonstrations after Floyd?
No.
At any point, did you discuss with any city official or employee whether the death of Mr. Floyd and the demonstrations that flowed from that might impact how the city of Rochester would deal with the Prude mental health arrest and his death?
When you say city officials, you mean the mayor and the deputy mayor? Or any city official?
Yeah, any city officials or even employees of the city, staff, in other words.
I mean, in the police department, we talked about it right around the FOIL requests when we received the FOIL request for the video.
Okay, and we'll come to that. Other than in the context of the FOIL request, and we'll talk about that in a moment. Do you remember anybody else at City Hall or the law department or the PD outside of the FOIL context talking about that the city of Rochester was going to treat the Prude matter in a certain way because of the existence of the Floyd killing and the demonstrations that followed?
No, during any of my conversations on March 23rd, the 30th, April 3rd, April 10th, there was no conversations whatsoever with any city official as to the comparison of Mr. Prude's death as well as Mr. Floyd's death.
Well, what you just described were all things that happened prior to Floyd, right?
Correct.
Right. So let's just focus on the Floyd, the period from when Mr. Floyd died up through August 4th. Other than what you've mentioned, which we're going to come to about FOIL, were there any other discussions where people were saying, this Prude thing and the Floyd thing are similar and related, and they may affect what we as the city of Rochester do with respect to Prude?
No, the incident with George Floyd, like you pointed out, was an officer with the knee on the neck of Mr. Floyd.
Was there any discussion of, other than the FOIL issue, which we'll come to in a moment, among city officials or city employees about how the fact of the Floyd death and the demonstrations after Floyd might impact the possible public release of information about the death of Mr. Prude?
No, we were dealing with what occurred on May 30th and the subsequent, protests that may have occurred. No, so we did not have any discussion with regard to that, and nor was that any deciding factor as to whether we should or not go public with Mr. Prude's incident.
Well, whether it was deciding or not, was it a factor at all, I guess is my question.
No, I mean, as I said earlier, the incident with George Floyd was an officer who had his knee on the neck for 9 minutes on Mr. Floyd. This was a different incident that occurred on Jefferson Avenue in the city of Rochester compared to Minneapolis, Minnesota.
Have you ever heard at any time Mayor Warren expressed the view that the death of Mr. Floyd and the ensuing demonstrations were relevant to when and whether information ought to be released about the Prude death?
No.
Catherine, let's go to Exhibit 27, please. Actually, let me ask one follow-up question on that. Did you ever hear anybody else at City Hall? By that, I mean Justin Roy, the deputy mayor, Mr. Udelson, or any other City Hall staff expressed the view that the death of Mr. Floyd and the demonstrations were relevant to whether and when information about the Prude death should be released?
No, during that time, no. That conversation that we had, I remember, was August 4th in the mayor's office. Prior to that, there was no conversation about Mr. Prude outside of my notifications to any city official, describing those dates that I had mentioned, post George Floyd. But there was no conversation that was ever brought up about Mr. Prude, even after I had made my notifications to the mayor, Justin Roy, Tim Curtin, and Patrick B.
So we're looking at what we've marked as Exhibit 27, which is Singletary 121 to 123. This is a series of emails that begins on June 4th at 9:46 a.m. I'm sorry, on June 3rd at 5:31 p.m. with an email from Stephanie Prince at the Law Department to Lieutenant Prokowski. And then the last one in the chain is the first one at the top of the first page of the exhibit, which is from you to Deputy Chief Simmons and others. You've seen this email chain before, right?
Yes.
And you recall receiving this chain on June 4th, 2020?
Yes.
This is the chain that you were referring to in your testimony a few minutes ago, where there was a discussion about the relevance of the Floyd death and the demonstrations after Floyd to responding to a FOIL request that was made on behalf of the Prude family, right?
That is correct.
And would you agree that what Chief Simmons is suggesting in his email to you is that he has a concern about people conflating the Prude incident and the death of George Floyd in a way that could lead to violence in the city of Rochester?
That is correct.
And did you agree with that concern? Did you share that concern of Deputy Chief Simmons?
Did we share that concern?
Yes.
Yes, after reading the email, yes, we did. And that's why when we talked about the FOIL request, that's why I directed him to set up a meeting with Patrick B. and Tim Curtin to discuss that and a number of factors relative that there was an ongoing investigation still being conducted by the Attorney General's office.
Right. So one of the concerns that you had and that prompted you to direct that a meeting be set up was that you were concerned that releasing information about the Prude mental health arrest in the context where there were national demonstrations about the Floyd death could create violence in the city of Rochester. Is that right?
Yes, that was Deputy Chief Simmons' concern. Yes.
And you shared that.
Correct.
Did you two talk about that, or was it just this email exchange?
We had a conversation about it.
Issue with your command staff?
I'm sorry?
Did you talk about that issue with others in your command staff as well?
I remember Deputy Chief Simmons and I talking about it. Other members of my command staff may have.
Do you remember talking about it with Lieutenant Prokowski?
I don't remember.
If you look at Lieutenant Prokowski's June 4th email at 9:46, which is the second page, Catherine, of this exhibit, thank you. First of all, he says in his message, quote, "I'm very concerned about releasing this prematurely in light of what's going on in Rochester and around the country." You understood that to be him referring to the demonstrations around the Floyd death, correct?
Correct.
Okay. And he says, I may be overthinking this, but I would think the chief's office and the mayor's office would want a heads up before this goes out. You understood Mr. Lieutenant Prokowski to be saying that you and the mayor's office would want to know before information, including body worn camera footage of the Prude mental health arrest was released to the family.
That is correct. Had the video been released, we certainly would have had those conversations with the mayor. One of the primary reasons was meeting with Corporation Counsel was to have that discussion. I think upon having that discussion with Corporation Counsel, Tim Curtin and Patrick Beath, it was a Microsoft Teams meeting. Corporation Counsel said that they would look into it, and the decision was made ultimately to not release the video. That's a decision that's made by Corporation Counsel and the Communications Department. We provide whatever it is requested of us as a department. That final decision rests with them. But we did have a conversation about such, and had that video been, authorized to be released, if Corporation Counsel said they were going to be releasing that video, certainly it would have involved the mayor's office. But because it did not, we didn't have a conversation with the mayor's office, either with Corporation Counsel or police department.
Is it your understanding that the body worn camera footage of the Prude arrest was in fact released pursuant to FOIL to the Prude family lawyers?
I think I found that later on. Again, those decisions and conversations are had between Corporation Counsel and the Prude's families that I was never involved in.
Okay, we'll come back to that. When you received the June 4th email chain, this June 4th email chain, and you said, I totally agree, in response to Deputy Chief Simmons sending you the chain, did you also totally agree that the mayor's office should be given a heads up before information is released to the Prude family pursuant to FOIL?
No. What I was agreeing on was obviously some of the concerns that he had in his email specific to the ongoing criminal investigation and the body worn camera being released, as well as some of the concerns that he had expressed in the email relative to the climate that was going on. So I said, yeah, let's have a meeting with Corporation Counsel to see if the video would be released. Again, had the video been released, we would have had those conversations with the mayor's office.
Okay, well, I think the last thing you said, I want to just follow up on. So would it be fair to say that on June 4th, when you read this chain, you determined that if the decision was made to release the body worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest pursuant to FOIL, that's something that the mayor's office would have to be told about in light of demonstrations and unrest in Rochester in the wake of Floyd?
Yes, had that video been released, we would have had those conversations with the mayor's office and the communications director. To my understanding, at that particular point in time, the video was not going to be released. And had it been released, we would have had those conversations. When the video was released, counsel to the AG's office, I was not aware of that.
We'll come back to that. Thank you. So when you read this chain, you see that Lieutenant Prokowski has copied in Captain Umbrino. Is that Lieutenant Prokowski's boss?
Yes.
Okay. And Captain Umbrino talks a little bit about this issue as well, and he says, quote, I told you before this is closed, and after further discussion, that is up for interpretation on the RPD's end. Did you understand Captain Umbrino to be saying that the Major Crimes Unit criminal review of the Prude matter was closed at least as of June 4th, 2020?
Yes, I believe that's how he's interpreting, but I wasn't privy to the conversation that him and his supervisor had, which was Commander Favor. So I wouldn't be able to garner exactly what Frank Umbrino meant when he was translating to Commander Favorite.
Right.
I'm sorry, I didn't understand you. You didn't, I wouldn't be able to garner exactly what,
Captain Umbrino was translating in his email to Commander Favorite.
But when you read this communication on June 4th, would it be fair to say that it was your understanding that Captain Umbrino was saying that the MCU investigation had been closed?
Yes, remember in April, mid-April, the Attorney General's office had took over the investigation. So they were getting ready to interview the officers at that time in April before the Attorney General's office took over the investigation.
And would you agree, Chief Singletary, that what you understood Captain Umbrino to be saying when you read this on June 4th was that there were ways for the RPD to interpret the situation in such a way as to have a reason not to release the body-worn camera footage pursuant to FOIL?
I don't think I read that much into it without knowing what Captain Umbrino exactly meant. I don't think I read that much into it.
Well, one thing he said is that we can actively label, this can be labeled still as an active investigation, and that the investigation could be interpreted technically as remaining, quote, open, end quote. Would you agree that that you understood Captain Umbrino to be saying, look, we can say that this is technically open so that we can deny the FOIL request?
I would say that the investigation was open based on the Attorney General's office has not concluded their portion. Again, I can't speculate as to what Captain Umbrino meant.
Well, I'm not asking you to. I'm asking you to tell me what you thought when you read this. Let me ask it more generally. You would agree, Chief, that when you read this, you understood Captain Umbrino did not want the body-worn camera footage to be released pursuant to FOIL, right?
Again, I don't know exactly what Captain Umbrino meant when he wrote the email.
You don't know what he meant when he said, in light of recent events throughout the country, any release of information should be in conjunction with and coordinated with the mayor and the chief, as it very well may have intense ramifications. Did you understand that phrase?
Correct. I understood that phrase to mean the body-worn camera was going to be released, and that is one of the reasons that we set up a meeting with Corporation Counsel. Again, had that body-worn camera been released, that certainly would have involved conversations with the mayor and the communications director, and I'm pretty sure about Corporation Counsel. But the body-worn camera at that time, to my understanding, was not released publicly.
One of the things that Chief Simmons said in his communication to you at the top of this chain is, quote, and go back to page 1, if you would, Catherine. In the second full paragraph of his 1223 email is, I ask that we reach out to Corporation Counsel and ask them to deny the request based on the fact that the case is still active, and in that, as it is currently being investigated for possible criminal charges to be brought forth by the AG. When you read that, you understood that Deputy Chief Simmons wanted to deny the FOIL request for the body-worn camera footage as of this point, correct?
Correct.
And you agreed with that, right?
It was a totally agree if you can set up a Zoom meeting with Pat and or Tim. So there was a number of things that he had in his email that can be construed that I would agree with.
Right. I'm asking you what you in fact, isn't it true that you in fact totally agreed that you should reach out to the corporate counsel and ask them to deny the FOIL request?
Well, in Deputy Chief Simmons' statements, he does say that, and that was going to be part of the conversation that we had with Corporation Counsel as no final decision had been made. But Deputy Chief Simmons did suggest that, yes.
Right, and I'm saying, and you agreed that you should ask Corp Counsel to deny the request, right?
Well, that was going to be part of the conversation.
I understand that was going to be part of the conversation. I'm just asking whether you agreed or disagreed that you were going to ask them to deny the request.
Yes, I mean, we were going to have a conversation about such. So totally agree. If you can set up a Zoom meeting with Pat and or Tim, and we discuss the concerns that we had with there being an ongoing criminal investigation.
Well, Chief Simmons asserts that it would have been a false narrative to compare the Floyd arrest and death to the Prude arrest and death, right? That's his term, false narrative.
Correct.
And he says that creating that false narrative would create animosity and potentially violent blowback in the community, right?
Correct.
And you agreed with all that, didn't you?
I think what he's saying is that the false narrative could be that this was, again, the differences between Mr. Floyd and Mr. Prude. In Minneapolis, Minnesota, as we all know, there was a police officer who kneeled on the neck of Mr. Floyd for almost nearly 9 minutes. This incident was different. It occurred here in Rochester, New York.
Mm-hmm. And you believe that from your perspective, falsely comparing those two things or treating them as being comparable and the same would potentially create violent blowback in the Rochester community, right?
I can see how people can draw similarities as such.
Right. And so from your point of view, as of before you had the meeting with Mr. Curtin and Mr. Beef, your perspective was, let's see if we can deny the FOIA request and not release this information at this point. Fair?
I would say my perspective was to have a conversation about the reasons. Deputy Chief Simmons sent an email with regard to his concerns that were also echoed by other members of the department. So I said, let's set up a meeting with Corporation Counsel to discuss. There hadn't been a decision that was made yet.
And there was such a meeting, right?
There was on June 5th.
And I don't want you to tell me or testify to comments that were made in the meeting where you or anybody from the department was seeking legal advice from Mr. Curtin. Strike that. Who was present for the meeting?
It was Deputy Corporation Counsel Patrick Beef, myself, Deputy Chief Simmons, and Corporation Counsel Tim Curtin.
Okay. And how long did the meeting last?
I think it was a half hour.
Mm-hmm. And when you completed the meeting, after the meeting, having had the discussion that you referred to earlier, were you of the belief that the Corporation Counsel ought to deny public release of the body-worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
Yes, there were certain factors that we talked about was the mental hygiene arrests, HIPAA, and also the factors around the nation that we had conversations about. And at the conclusion of the meeting, Tim Curtin said he would look into it. And from there, the video was not released publicly.
And when you refer to factors around the country, you're talking about demonstrations in the wake of Floyd, right?
That is correct.
Okay. Did you understand that the fact that there were demonstrations in the wake of the death of George Floyd and that was a challenge that you were facing in Rochester, did you understand after this meeting that that was a lawful basis to deny the release of information requested pursuant to the Freedom of Information Law?
That because there were protests going on around the country, that was a lawful reason to deny it?
And in,
No.
And in Rochester?
No, I don't think that that's a lawful reason to deny a FOIA request.
Okay. Do you recall a one-to-one meeting that you had with Mayor Warren on May 26th, 2020? This just taking you back in time now. This would have been the day after the Floyd killing.
Yes.
And did you have a discussion with the mayor on the 26th about the Floyd matter?
I'm sure we had conversations, even probably as it was playing out, in hours or days afterwards, about that particular incident itself.
In the context of discussing the Floyd matter with the mayor, did you also discuss the Prude matter with the mayor?
No, we did not.
What was the subject of, what was the basic content of your discussions in this period with the mayor about Mr. Floyd and his death?
I think we had just talked about what was going on around the country. The mayor and I always talked about policing, locally and around the nation. And we would always talk about things that were going on in other cities. On May 26th, when we had our one-on-one, I kept an agenda, I kept a notebook of such. I think that was shared with you. I'm not sure if you had that, but
Catherine, let's go to Exhibit 51. I didn't mean to cut you off, Chief.
no problem.
So what we have here is Exhibit 51. It's several pages. I don't have my paper copy handy, but it starts with Singletary 295. And I have to say, Chief, you're very organized, but I couldn't make heads or tails of this. So why don't we turn to the first page just so you can tell us what it is, and then direct us to any notes that you have that relate to the Prude matter.
Yes, so the month of May, these were things that occurred, and the dates are, depending on when I wrote it down, in the month of May. So this would be things that I would discuss or want to discuss with the mayor during my one-on-one meetings.
I see. Let me interrupt you and just get a clarification. So take, for example, what you wrote down on 514 is that first line. You say, "You of our armed officer, something," and email. So is this telling us that on the 14th, you made a note to yourself, next time I speak to the mayor, I want to talk about something having to do with the University of Rochester Officer Corps. Is that right?
That is correct.
Okay. So the dates are dates when you were writing down for yourself something you wanted to bring up with her at some future point. Is that fair?
That is correct. During that monthly meeting that was scheduled.
Got it. And the monthly meeting was typically a one-on-one or part of the senior management team meetings that have been referred to?
No, it was a one-on-one that her and I had scheduled, usually the last Monday, usually at 1 o'clock in the afternoon, sometimes 1:30, depending on her schedule. But it was usually about a 45-minute meeting, and we would talk about things that were coming up. One of the things that we always talked about was the homicide update.
Got it. Can you take us to any notations that you have here? It's only a few pages, as I recall, where you wanted to remind yourself to discuss matters relating to Prude with the mayor.
There was no discussion with Prude with the mayor in the month of May.
But what I'm saying is take us through this exhibit.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. For April 27th, we had a discussion. Well, let's start in March 23rd.
So Catherine, go to the next page. Go to the next page.
Yes.
Okay. So at the bottom of this, of 298, Singletary 298, you have some notes from starting 3/23. Is that 3/23/2020?
Correct.
Okay. And you say there are some notes here that relate to Prude?
Yes, there's the third line in the column where it says 323. Third line down, it says homicide update / in custody. The in custody would have been the conversation that I had with the mayor, and this would have been our March 23rd meeting at 1:30 that we caught into the 428 number.
Okay. What's the next entry in the book that relates to Prude?
Next entry would have been our one-on-one, I believe on 427.
Catherine, if you can turn the page, thank you.
So if you see 427, it says, obviously the homicide update, which was talking about homicides in the city of Rochester and giving her an update on such. And then also it was the update to the Prude matter. It says AG Office Prude. It was when I informed her that the Attorney General's office had took over the investigation.
Okay. Next.
I think on August 24th, we never had any conversation about Prude after that, as there was nothing going on with, well, the internal investigations had commenced already, the internal as well as the criminal review. And then the Attorney General's office had to go to investigations in mid-April. So as far as from the RPD standpoint, the internal investigation, we had not interviewed the officers. So we were kind of at a standstill with that investigation, other than gathering other data, materials, and talking to people who were not sworn members of the department. The criminal had obviously been taken over, criminal investigation had been taken over by the Attorney General's office at that point. So there was really no updates to provide the mayor at that particular point in time after letting her know that the Attorney General's office had took over the investigation.
So after April 27th, you didn't have any conversations with the mayor about the Prude matter until August 4th. Is that right?
Until August 4th. And then afterwards, there was, if you see down over, it says August 24th, BWC. In the mayor's memo, I think that was written by James Smith. In the mayor's memo, she mentions that she wanted all body-worn camera recordings of every use of force in the city of Rochester. And so within that memo, when I wrote down BWC here, it was a follow-up to that. And I told her that there are thousands of uses of forces that occur within the city of Rochester. I said, as chief of police, I don't review every single use of force, the ones that are brought to my attention, or whether it's brought to my attention internally through the chain of command or externally, a citizen in the city of Rochester or a video that went viral. So in response to the mayor's memo to me saying that she wanted to review every single body-worn camera and have it sent to her, we had a conversation about it. And I said, Mayor, are you sure you want to do this? Who in your office is going to look at this? What are they looking for when they look at the video? Do they know what they're looking at? And there are just thousands of uses of forces that occur that involve body-worn camera within the city of Rochester. Now, the supervisors look at the body-worn camera video, but me as chief of police, I wouldn't look at every single use of force in the city of Rochester unless it was brought to my attention internally or externally. So I explained that to the mayor, and the mayor said, well, what's the process now? And I explained to her that when there's an incident that's brought to my attention within 48 hours, professional standards section conducts a preliminary review. And that preliminary review consists of looking at video as well as reviewing reports similar to the Prude incident, the 10-year-old who was handcuffed on Route 104. And then I make a determination as to whether there's going to be a full-blown investigation, if you will. I explained that to the mayor and she says, okay, chief, keep it as is, how it is. Because I wanted to make sure I clarified that point with her. Because I remember having a conversation with Deputy Chief Simmons saying, make sure you clarify that point with the mayor. She put it in a memo. You don't want her to try to use it against you later.
Got it. Thank you for that expansive answer. I want to go back a little bit in time and ask some narrow questions and try to just tick through some items. After you completed the June 5th meeting with Patrick Beath and Tim Curtin, were you aware that that the law department was going to release some records from the Prude mental health arrest, but not the body-worn camera footage?
I don't think I was made aware of that until quite some time. Again, the conversations that I had with the law department were limited to RPD specific. I was not in on any conversation with respect to Corporation Counsel and their dealings with either the AG's office or the Prude estate.
Okay, Catherine, you can take this one down. After your June 5th meeting with Mr. Curtin and Mr. Beath, was it your understanding that the body-worn camera footage from the Prude arrest would not be released to the Prude family until after the Attorney General's office had completed its criminal investigation?
That was my understanding.
And that's what you told your command staff, right?
Correct.
Mr. Chief Singletary, at one point in time in 2020, you were talking to people about the possibility of running for mayor of the city of Rochester. Isn't that right?
I would say talking to people about running for mayor. The people would always say that I should run for mayor one day. I was content and happy on being police chief, but there were times where people would say, you know, you should run for mayor.
Right.
And my response was always, you know, I'm happy being police chief. I would never run against the mayor. If she were to step down or where she were to, you know, leave office for another office, then I would strongly consider such. But, you know, I always said that, you know, while I was in a position of police chief, I would never run against the mayor.
Right. And in fact, if you look at Exhibit 1, which we're not going to put on the screen, you communicate that to a friend on March 28th, 2020, correct?
This is exhibit 1, you said? Exhibit 8?
Yeah, this is the one with all the text messages.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I put eyes on it. It's number 8, right? No.
It's Singletary 05 at the bottom, and the text number is 12.
That is correct.
Right. So this is a message that you sent on March 28th to a friend where you say, quote, when/if Lovely stepped down, I would strongly consider such. And that what you're saying there is you would strongly consider running for mayor when or if Ms. Warren was not running. Is that fair?
Yeah, that is fair. You know, I mean, again, people see it on social media all the time. People still say it, that I should run for mayor. But when I was police chief, I stated that I would never run against the mayor.
And if you look at Singletary 31, text number 277. Let's see something. This is a friend of yours telling you that Mayor Warren has decided to run for re-election, right?
Yeah, I'm not sure where the friend got that information. That was June 30th of the last year.
And when you met with Mayor Warren on September 7th, you told her that people were encouraging you to run for mayor against her, right?
I told her, I think I said, yeah, I think there's people that want me to run for mayor. It was all over social media.
And did you tell her that that was something you were thinking about doing?
I told her, I said I was content of being police chief, but you know, one day if the opportunity came, I would, but I would never run against her.
Mm-hmm. Is that what you told her on the 7th, that you would never run against her?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, that was, I've always been stern in my convictions on that. I would never run against the mayor.
Have you considered running against the mayor now?
Have I considered it? People have talked to me about it, but no, not during this process. No.
You haven't considered it at all. Not something you've reflected on.
I mean, I'm flattered by it, but no, I mean, I have enough to deal with right now at this moment.
Mm-hmm. Have a look at on Exhibit 1. Hold on one second. Page Singletary 32. And I'm looking at text number 312 at the bottom of the page. Chief, do you see that?
Yes.
This is a text exchange that you had with Mr. Maazel of the Rochester Police Locust Club, right?
That is correct.
And in it you say, Mike, I'm getting ready to step into a meeting regarding our earlier conversation about the BWC video. Have you run any of this by Sandra Dorley? We have pending criminal charges, one of which is a felony against an officer. I know Sandra takes issue with us releasing BWC when there is pending criminal matters yet to be adjudicated. Also, by showing the BWC, does it put our officers back into the limelight again? Thoughts? My question on this is simple. This is a communication between you and Mr. Maazel, right?
That is correct.
Does this relate to the Prude matter?
No, this was a matter that related to summer protests that the officers were dealing with. Mike Maazel wanted to release body-worn camera video to the public as to what our officers were dealing with. And the union president cannot release body-worn camera video without the consent of the chief. And at this point, Maazel and I had a conversation about such, and I think one of the officers was a victim. When I say felony against an officer, one of the officers was a victim in one of the incidents that I think he wanted to release. And so I said, I wasn't really seeing, I guess, the fruits of releasing that video without causing agitation in the public. So I saw no merits in releasing the video. So that's part of the conversation that we had. It was not related to the Prude matter.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to know. Couple more questions and then maybe we should take a break. We've been going almost 2 hours. So looking at Exhibit 50, I don't even think, Catherine, we need to post this. This is your notice of claim, Chief Singletary. And I'm focusing on paragraph 22 of Exhibit 50, where you say that on August 4th, you received a notification from Mr. Curtin that a notice of claim had been filed in connection with the Prude death.
Yes.
And Mr. Curtin asks you in that communication whether Mayor Warren had seen the body-worn camera footage from the Prude death.
Correct.
Prior to that communication from Mr. Curtin, had any member of any city official or city employee asked you previously whether the mayor had seen the body-worn camera footage of the Prude mental health arrest?
No.
Had any official or employee of the city of Rochester prior to this moment of August 4th urged you to show the body-worn camera footage to Mayor Warren, the footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
No city official did. No.
Somebody said that they had urged you to do that prior to August 4th on multiple occasions. They wouldn't be telling the truth. Is that your testimony?
That is correct. No one had conversation with me about showing the video to Mr. Prude video to anyone in City Hall. Yeah, they would be lying.
They'd be lying. Okay, it's not something you're unclear about in terms of your recollection. You're clear on this one.
Yes.
Okay. And to your knowledge, when was the first time that Mayor Warren viewed the body-worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
Well, when Tim Curtin sent me the email, my response, or text message, my response was, I don't believe she has. I said, I agree. And he told me the amount that they were suing for, and I said, wow, $75 million. And when I say I don't believe she has, that means I don't know if she saw it prior to, August 4th, or was she shown to it by anyone other than someone in the police department?
Fair enough. My question is, as you sit here today, Chief Singletary, what is your best understanding of when it was the first time that she saw the body-worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest?
Based on my understanding and what she has told me is August 4th. But again, I don't know if she saw the video prior to August 4th. That I'm not aware of.
Do you have any information that suggests to you that she did?
That she did?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I wasn't clear. Do you have any evidence or information within your knowledge base, direct or indirect, that suggests that the mayor saw the body worn camera footage from the Prude mental health arrest at any time prior to August 4th, 2020?
I don't.
Okay. I have an area that we could probably do in 20 minutes if you want to do that, a half an hour, or do you
Sure.
want to stop? It's up to you and obviously to council members Patterson and Evans.
As long as everybody else is okay with it, I'm okay with it.
If everyone else is fine, we can continue.
All right. Okay. I'm sorry that we're going back and forth in time, that this is the way depositions go and why they're different from trial. It's not necessarily linear. It's more thematic. So I put yourself back in time, and I want to direct your attention in Exhibit 50 to paragraph 15 of your notice of claim, which is Exhibit 50. Yes, thank you, Catherine. Just so people have it in front of them. So in paragraph 15, you say that you had a call with District Attorney Dorley on March 24th, and you've talked a little bit about that in your testimony today. My question is, this actually maybe you may have talked about this already, but just to frame it, was there any discussion with District Attorney Dorley about Executive Order 147 or the fact that the Attorney General's office might become involved in the Prude matter?
Yes, we did discuss briefly as to whether they would become involved or not. We just didn't know. Particularly one, we didn't know if they would become involved because Mr. Prude had not passed away. He was still alive. Prognosis poor, but still alive. So we did not know that they would be taking over the investigation.
Did you and District Attorney Dorley discuss what rules or protocols might apply in the event that the Attorney General's office became involved in the Prude matter and handled it rather than the Monroe County DA's office?
No, not really. It was just in vague terms. We knew that that the Attorney General's office would come involved if an unarmed individual died in police custody. We didn't know at what point in time that the Attorney General's office would be involved in the investigation, if at all.
When you spoke to, strike that, I think you said that you told the mayor on April 27th that the Attorney General's office had taken jurisdiction over this matter, correct?
Correct.
And when did you learn that the Attorney General's office taken over the matter?
I think Jim Summers sent from the Attorney General's office, sending a letter over to Sandra Dorley's office on April, let's say 16th or 21st. And it was days later, that's when I advised the mayor of such during my one-on-one.
Okay. Catherine, why don't you just show the chief Exhibit 21, please? This is Exhibit 21, Singletary 109. Is this the letter from Jen Summers at the AG's office to District Attorney Dorley on April 21st?
That's correct.
And I see that Sergeant Zenilovic of your department was copied on that, right?
That is correct.
So does this help you place in time that you likely learned of the takeover? Strike that. Was it by this letter that you determined or learned that the AG's office was taking jurisdiction over the Prude matter?
No, I believe it was via passing up the chain of command at some point in time. It may not have been that particular day. It may have been a couple of days after the fact, but I believe it was related to me from Deputy Chief Joe Morbito.
Okay. But it's your belief that you did not learn of the AG's taking jurisdiction prior to April 21st. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay.
It was sometime after, I want to say the 21st, and which prompted me to notify the mayor the 27th.
Got it. And when you when you learned that the Attorney General's office was taking jurisdiction over this matter, did you well, strike that. Prior to understanding that the AG's office was taking over, what was your understanding of the protocols or customs about what could or could not be made publicly available, announced publicly about a criminal investigation being conducted by the Monroe County DA's office?
By the Monroe County District Attorney's Office?
Yes.
Are you referring to RPD protocol or?
RPD protocol, city protocol, their MCDA protocol. If it's different, you'll tell me.
Yeah, there was no protocol with respect to RPD of notifying the public.
What was the fact that there had been, at the time when the Monroe County DA's office was investigating, was the fact that there had been an in-custody death, was that supposed to be kept confidential from your point of view?
No.
Okay. And during the period that the Monroe County DA's office was investigating, was the fact that there was a criminal investigation being conducted by the MCDA, was that supposed to be confidential from your point of view?
No.
And did that change by virtue of the fact that the AG's office had become involved? In other words, was there anything about the AG's office's involvement that made it confidential that there had been an in-custody death?
No.
Same question with respect to the fact that there was a criminal investigation. Did the fact that the AG's office was the investigating office, that mean that the existence of a criminal investigation by that office was confidential and should not be disclosed publicly?
No.
Okay. Mr. Patterson and Councilmember Evans, with your deference, I would actually think this is a good time to break because the next section is a little rocky waters. So, can we,
So not a problem. We can break. How long would you like to break for?
whatever the chief and his counsel would like to do. I don't need a long time myself, but it's at his pleasure.
I do.
Most important person is our stenographer, Celeste.
So it sounds like we need at least a half an hour. Is that fair?
I can work with that.
Want to say 2:15?
Yeah, well, so if we're gonna go with half an hour, we'll push it a little further. Why don't we come back at 2:10? Well, come back at 2:15. Does that work for everybody?
Yes, sir.
2:15.
Councilmember Evans, do you concur?
I concur.
All right, so we're out until 2:15. We'll see you all back shortly.
Thank you, council members.
Thank you.